Oh my goodness, well, it's 9 o'clock. Let me talk to the class a little bit. So thank you, everyone, for coming. People who are our students, of course, and then we have members of the public here. And I am so thankful that we have Scott Strazzante here. And it's so funny, here we have Gary Fong, photojournalist in the back. Thank you for coming. You guys who are not students, do you want to introduce yourselves, just so we kind of can say hello?
Sure.
Yes.
I'm Mary Jackson. I'm a journalist with World Magazine.
Yeah.
And Gary shoots a lot of our photos.
Oh, that's great. Oh, you guys both came. I'm so excited. And then yourself, you're Joel.
Joel Davidson,
Yeah.
photographer, and connected up through Twitter. See you, follower.
Excellent. No, thank you, Joel, for coming. Joel was the first one here. Absolutely. And so it is, it's exciting for us, and I do need to acknowledge this, to have like an in-person guest. Like it has been so long since we've been able to do this. It's all been on Zoom. And so having this kind of live thing is it's exciting. And thank you for coming.
Yeah, I gave a Zoom presentation like 6 months ago, and somehow I forgot to share my screen, and the people in the audience couldn't talk to me, so I showed pictures for 45 minutes without them being able to see them, but I talked about them.
Ooh.
And so that was not ideal.
Oh, in oral history.
In oral history of
history.
photos you cannot see.
As we get started here, I wanted to just talk about how I became aware of Scott's photographs. And in a previous career, I was a photojournalist for a weekly paper. And so I always had an awareness, and my radar was always on for great photojournalism, and Scott's work is great. But what really spoke to me was he had his own projects. He had his day job as a photographer that it was clear he was passionate about. But then, his other work was fascinating too. And as a teacher, I want students to understand this idea that photography can be many things to you. It can be the way you make a living. It can be your passion. You could do something else and be very serious about photography. And so, and still do great work. And, I thought it was very thankful that Scott came in, because to me, he was one of the rare kind of creatures who covers all these bases, And then it was also, the students these days and this year, especially, were interested in what is an NFT and this mysterious market out there. And myself, in trying to learn about this, Scott was one of the same voices, in this. And I had sent the students the piece that you had written in the first person for NPPA.
Yes.
Yeah, about your own experience with it. And it was so honest, and it was so straightforward that, it was just impressive. And I think it helped me understand this a little bit and the ups and downs of it without the hype, and appreciated that. So I wanted to just read a little introduction to Scott's own book, which is a beautiful book, which I think I bought this a couple of years ago. It's been out for a while, right?
Yeah.
And it's a great book of his street photography, his personal work. And the introduction, he goes, "I'd like to dedicate this book to all the souls that I have stolen." No, wait. I mean, this book could not have been possible without the unwitting victims of my stealthy snapping. Strike that. How about thanks to those who didn't know and to those who did but didn't punch me in the face? Seriously, humans are endlessly fascinating, and I never get bored observing them. Everyone in this book caught my attention for one of the myriad reasons that I am so glad that each of these unique creatures crossed my path. And, the honesty and the humor in that, I thought was great. And so I'll stop talking and I'll turn this over to Scott.
Oh, I like you talking better. You should just keep going. So anyways, thanks for those who made the effort to come here and those who had to be here. I appreciate that. So I'll just start showing photographs, because for me, that's probably, the easiest way for me to talk. So, I've been a newspaper photographer since 1986. And I went to college in Wisconsin, a place called Ripon College. And my dad was a tire dealer on the south side of Chicago. And I went to college to become a business major to take over the tire dealership. And my heart was not in that. But I really had no other plan for my life. So I just kind of went along that path. And I'd always been a sports fan in Chicago. My family would go to Bears games, Cubs games, and I was a big Sports Illustrated fan. So my bedroom as a teen was lined with all the Walter Yost covers on one side of the wall, and then the swimsuit magazine on the other side of the wall. And so I really love sports photography, but I never thought of it as a career, even though I would take my camera to sporting events and photograph these, sports action from my seat. And so back in those days, I would shoot film and I would get the 4x6s developed, and the action would be a half an inch by a half an inch. And I would cut them out and put them in an album. So I was kind of curating my own photography without even knowing that I love photography. So fast forward to the middle of my college career, still on a business major path. And I came across a gallery show at my college, a photographer named Paul Giroux, who was a Chicago Tribune photographer at the time. And I walked into this room and I saw his work. And it was just, for me, it was just like I was struck by lightning. It's like there was a photo story of a monk that I still remember, like 7 of the 12 photos. And there was a St. Francis de Sales high school football game, which was right when I grew up. And there were just like these images which I could relate to. And I also was making this connection that the things that I love to photograph could actually be a career. And so Ripon College had no photo program. So I became an art major and studied art history. And kind of my photographic style, I think, is derived a lot from the masters of arts and painting. And I became a watercolorist for a while, which I was not very good at. So I got out of college and, being naive and young, I sent not photos, but a cover letter and a resume to all the major newspapers and smaller newspapers in the Midwest. And luckily, a gentleman named Irv Gephardt at the Milwaukee Journal said, "Hey, come on up and show me your stuff." And so I brought my portfolio up, which consisted of 10 photos of public sculpture in Chicago, none with people in it. Then I had 10 photos that were reflections and shadows and silhouettes and things, because I was afraid of people. I really did not like photographing people. And then I had some bad sports photos. And so Irv, bless his soul, was like, "Oh yeah, looks like you have a good eye, but you either need to go back to school or get a job at a small paper." And so I went to Columbia College and I enrolled there, and I was in Photo 1 when 2 months in, a small newspaper said, "Hey, you want to come in for an interview?" I said, "Sure." And so I brought in, I don't even know if I brought in any photos. And they were like, "Do you know how to use a flash?" And I didn't, but I'm like, "Yes." And they said, "Do you know how to roll your own film?" Which back in the days, you would have this bulk roll of 35 millimeter film. You'd have to roll it into the canisters yourself. And they said, "Do you know how to do that?" I'm like, "Yes," but I did not. And they're like, "Okay, you're hired." And so basically I just learned by making mistakes. And that, that newspaper I was at for 1 year. And then it got bought out by a slightly larger paper in suburban Chicago. And they photographed professional sports. And so all of a sudden, a year into my career, having really no experience, I'm sitting courtside photographing Michael Jordan. It's just like, wow, this is amazing. And so, once again, I'm an observer. I love looking at things. When I was a child, my family, we would all get into our station wagon and drive across the country every summer. So I kind of feel like my visual aptitude is just from looking out the window of a station wagon going across America. And so I kind of just fell forward a lot in my career. I did the step ladder, working at a little bit bigger newspapers. Ended up at a place called Joliet Herald News, and that was a great newspaper. They encouraged you to do long-term photo stories and to set up your own assignments, things I've never done before. And so I just kind of, kept, adding things to my arsenal, but still at the same time, just, I was fascinated by people, but still scared of people. Like, it was difficult for me to photograph someone and then have to approach them and get their name because, that fear of rejection. So, I just kind of, worked my way along and, would win an award here, an award there. And then the awards I was winning started to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And then, I finally won National Newspaper Photographer of the Year in 2000. And then the Chicago Tribune noticed me and hired me. I spent 13 years there and really enjoyed that. And then the way fate works, I was at a National Geographic seminar, a photo seminar, and I had worked in Joliet with Todd Heisler, who was a New York Times photographer who won a Pulitzer Prize in Denver at the Rocky Mountain News. And his boss was Judy Walgren then. And so we were at this seminar, and they have a happy hour after the seminar. And so we were all, drinking, and, just I was kind of being a social butterfly going around, and all of a sudden nature called and I had to go to the restroom. And so I'm going to the restroom, and as I was about to get to the restroom, Todd's heading out the door with Judy saying, "Hey, we're going to dinner. Do you want to come with?" I'm like, "Sure." And I'd never met Judy before. And she's just this fabulous, wonderful, just larger than life figure. And so we're having dinner, having a couple glasses of wine. She's like, "Strazzante, how do you like Chicago?" I'm like, "It's okay. Come work for me in San Francisco. You'll love it." I'm like, "Okay." And that was pretty much, that's how I ended up in San Francisco, because I had to go to the bathroom.
That's a very casual story.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, and that's pretty much how it was. And, of course, there was some sort of proper channels that Judy had to go through, and other photographers did have to apply for the job, but I kind of felt I had the inside track. And so it's really interesting just how life works, because I was happy in Chicago. I never really, planned on coming to California. And I grew up spending a lot of time in LA with my relatives, but never knew anything about the Bay Area. When I first got here, someone said, "Where are you going to live?" "In the East Bay." And I'm like, "Where's that?" I'd never even heard of the East Bay. And so I was just so naive. But anyways, that's enough about my life. Here's other people's lives. So my theory on photography is just to kind of, try to, create images that are emotional, that grab you, that bring you in. One of the biggest adjustments to working in California was when they told me I had to photograph wildfires. And I'm like, "What?" Like, "Yeah, here's your fire suit. Here's your helmet. Here's your goggles. Here's your gloves. Here's your fire tent in case you have to dig a hole and put this fire tent around you." I'm like, "Oh, great." So like my first fire, I was just so scared, and I had no idea what I was doing. We did get training. They gave us like 3 hours of training, which of course is not enough, because you just don't really know what you're gonna come across in wildfire. But now that I've been doing it for 6 years, 7 years, I'm a little more comfortable. This is an image I made at the campfire in Paradise, and by far the most, I don't know what adjectives to put on that day, because so many people lost their lives, but it was awe-inspiring, really, to kind of be in a town where every structure was on fire, and there was like no one there because everyone had evacuated. The firefighters, there really is no point to trying to put out a wildfire, because it's just impossible. So this was actually a Jesus Christ Latter-day Saint meeting house that I drove by it when a house, like part of the back of it, was on fire. And then I came back by later and just kind of watched it burn to the ground. And this fire kind of appeared from the rubble. And it just gave me this really kind of 9/11 flashback. Not that I was at 9/11, but just the images I'd seen at 9/11. And just, one of the craziest days. And so wildfires, there's so much to work with, but sometimes it's very difficult to get to places where the fire is at. So it just kind of depends on each fire is a different animal. But once again, I'm always trying to put the human element, or at least in wildfires, animals that are affected by the wildfires. And this was a couple Sacramento County deputies who had helped rescue some horses, and then they saw some chickens and they decided to try to rescue them, but that didn't quite go as well. So even though these are super sad situations, I'm always trying to celebrate life and inject some sort of humor, or at least, something that's a little bit uplifting. This is another fire up in Santa Rosa. Most of these fires happen in the middle of the night, and so you usually get a call around 11 p.m. from an editor saying, "Hey, can you head up here, head up there?" And you just never know what you're going to see, especially when you turn a corner and there's an emu standing there, a singed emu.
Wow.
So, these are the images where it's like, probably once in a lifetime where you're going to come across something like this, and it's just kind of strange and weird. And then this was a fire up at Napa, a literal deer in the headlights. And of course, most of you probably, we're here on the orange day or whatever you want to call it. One of the strangest days where, I work a 2 p.m. till 10 p.m. shift. And so I woke up probably around 8 in the morning. And I'm like, it's kind of a weird feel. And, everything was kind of orange outside. So I went downtown Mill Valley. And just as luck would have it, someone was trying to fix a clock, which, you always need that background element or foreground element or an element that kind of adds an extra layer. This was one of those days, though, where you could close your eyes and just push the shutter and make an amazing photo because everything was interesting. But, once again, I'm always trying to find just one little extra thing to add to a photo. My art history background sometimes comes into use. And this one, I wasn't really sure if I should do something like this. This was actually the Tubbs fire for Santa Rosa. And when you spend a week or 2 weeks covering a fire, you just kind of are looking for something different. And so I decided to do little detail images of the paint on cars that had burned or melted or, and so I created a whole bunch of them and then I made a grid out of it. And I was a little concerned that, making art out of someone else's tragedy was insensitive. But once again, just trying to find something to uplift and to be visually interesting.
I had a question.
Sure.
You talked about how you did study art in the beginning.
Mhm.
You weren't like from a journalism background
Right.
necessarily. Do you feel that has steered not just these images where you're trying to say, quote, make art,
Right.
but even in the photojournalistic ones? Because there is a sense of, like with your fire stuff, it looked surreal. And these things, like there was the image of a deer lit from headlights or something,
Mhm.
and then something else was going on.
Right.
And it almost kind of looked like a Salvador Dali, a curious juxtaposition of things.
Right.
Like, do you feel that that is informing your journalism?
Yeah, I don't know. Like, I think a lot of times what we do, it's not even reality, it's hyper reality. Because when I'm photographing things, I'm photographing the highs and the lows. I'm photographing parades, I'm photographing funerals, I'm photographing the most interesting people or the downtrodden. And really, we do a very poor job of photographing what life really looks like.
Yeah.
I'll go to a protest, it might be a 2-hour protest. And if there's a fight breaks out for 15 seconds and I photograph that, that is all the news will see.
Oh, yeah.
And they'll be like, oh my Lord, what a crazy time that is. And I think, that's one of the problems I think with society now, especially if you just sit and watch TV or on the internet, you think the world is burning down or falling apart when it's not. The vast majority of the world is very calm and boring, really, and so, but, so I think, I tend to make things look more interesting than they are maybe. And I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing, but, I definitely think that most photojournalists, we try to, document the truth, but, what famous photographer said, every photograph's a lie, so it's definitely, something that I don't think about too much, only in these situations when I'm thinking about my work, but yeah, I definitely cherry pick what I think are the most visually interesting or humorous or whatever. So it definitely is something I think about. And so I think one of the projects that I'll show later, where I just wanted to show what daily life looks like, but then also within that daily life, I'm still picking out the best and most interesting moments. So.
Right. And just a little addendum to that question is the work you're showing us, say from the fire, is this the stuff that's getting published? Or is it your favorite images that aren't getting published?
And it's about 50-50.
Is it?
Yeah, because usually for each assignment, I'll turn in between 10 to 30 images, and half the time my favorite images run, and half the time they don't. And I think a lot of that too is, when you're showing an image in 2D, I experienced it in 3D, so I know either, oh, this was a very difficult image to make, or this was really important in the context of what I felt. But then when you just see it as a photograph, sometimes those extra ingredients that make it important to me don't make it important to someone else. So, but I do think that, I work at a newspaper where we have top-notch photo editors, and they know a good photograph, and so sometimes when they don't pick what I think is the best, and I'm like, maybe that isn't the best,
right?
So that's always an interesting journey. But I love having social media as a way to be a self-publisher.
Oh,
You
yeah.
know, because, you know, if you follow me on social media, you know, I'm an oversharer and like, you know, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, you know, I feel like if I'm not posting something every 6 hours, people are going to forget about me. So it's kind of a sickness, but anyways, here's a photo back in Chicago. I did a lot of coverage of the violence on the Southwest sides. And, you know, once again, you would think that, oh my gosh, you know, a photographer in the Southwest side of Chicago, that's dangerous. It's not, because, you know, the vast majority of the people are good, hardworking people, and you know, they invite you into their lives. And this was a situation where I was doing a story on this group. They were called the Tucson Riders, where they were motorcycle riders, and they would drive out into the community, into these places where there were shootings, and they would kind of just have these impromptu rallies where they would try to, you know, educate people on you know, just why it's important to not keep quiet about if you see a murder or see a shooting. And so we were actually at the scene of this one shooting where two 35-year-old twins were killed. And the people brought me up to the porch to talk to the mother, and she thanked me for being there and said, "You have to come photograph my son's funerals. You have to be there. Please make photos." And so I showed up at the funeral, and I was in the back, and the mother came and got me. She's like, "No, you have to come up front. Come up front." You know, and they're almost like pushing me towards the casket. And so, you know, the one thing that I really appreciate about some of these communities in Chicago is that they're so open with their grief and they want to share it. And, you know, and as a, you know, photojournalist, that's really a great gift that they can give me. And so, but once again, it's just heartbreaking images from Chicago. And, you know, it's definitely a problem that still exists. This was my first earthquake in California. This was in Napa. Wow. I'd never been to Napa before. So my first experience was rolling to Napa in pitch darkness down the main street with glass everywhere. And I don't, even though I lied about using a flash at my first job, I still never use a flash. So I totally love serendipitous light. And this was a passing car turning a corner, illuminated this little girl as she was holding a brick that she had kind of grabbed as a souvenir from a facade that had broken.
Wow, that's amazing light.
Thank you. This was the VTA mass shooting last year in San Jose. This was the rawest display of emotion I've ever seen at a public gathering. I think it was because they had this memorial the day after the shooting, and people hadn't even, I think, processed any of their grief yet. And so every family was there, and some were more private and didn't want to be photographed, but this one family, you know, wanted to, you know, get the memory of their lost loved one out there. And this young girl, you know, was the centerpiece of that grief for sure. This is a long-term story I did on Randy Harrison, who his name is P Money, rapper from Richmond. And P Money was sleeping in his Mercedes-Benz in a gas station parking lot for 2 months in Richmond. And I followed him on his journey, until he got a job in an apartment.
So are these stories the paper story? Like, say, that sounds like an amazing story.
Yeah.
Was that your story you came up with? Or
So usually they start out as a daily assignment, and then I think this is a really good story. I want to expand on it. Like, this is a perfect example. This is back in Chicago, and I was sent down to a community about an hour south where the high school wrestling coach was out jogging one day and got hit by a car and died. And he left behind a wife and 4 kids under the age of 5. And so the story was the community has rallied and they're having a fundraiser, and please go photograph the fundraiser. And you know, first stop by the family's house and meet them. And so I knocked on the door, the Blanchett family, and they welcomed me in. And the first thing I saw was this girl here, and she was laying on her couch like this with a picture of her father next to her. And so I walked in, and within 10 seconds, I made like one of the best images. And it was definitely, her name's Addison. And it definitely was like, I knew that there was a story here because, you know, it was, and I knew the story was the girl. And so I decided to, or I asked the paper if I could continue to follow the family until the 1-year anniversary of the death of the father, and they agreed. And so I would stop by every week or so and spend time with the family, or if they were going to, they went to a Cubs game once, and I went to that. So just kind of cherry picking things here and there to photograph. And then finally, they went to Disney World on the 1-year anniversary, and I went with. And this was the 1-year anniversary of the father's death, and the daughter was still of course sad, even though she was at Disney World. And the thing about, I've done probably 50 to 75 stories in my 30-year career, and then you get so attached to people, and they get attached to you, and in the back of your head you're going to be leaving them, and even because they just, if you sit and listen to people, they'll share their life with you, and of course you have to share your life back too. I'm an open book with the people I photograph. And this was a really tough situation because the two youngest kids were 2 and 3. And when I first met them, they punched me and kicked me. I don't know if, they were just really angry and stuff. And then after a month or so, it turned. And then every time I would see them, they would just hug me. They wouldn't let go. And I, like, the whole time, it just gives me chills now. I knew I was going to leave them eventually. They lived an hour away from me. And so I spent so much time with them, and then one day at the end, thank you for everything, and I've never seen them again. And am I adding to their grief? Am I teaching these young girls that men leave? I don't know, maybe I'm giving too much, credit to my part in their life, but each of these stories kind of, part of you stays with them, and so, now that I've been doing this for 37 years, I still do the stories, but I'm not quite as eager, and I think so. It's kind of an interesting dynamic, and I still haven't quite figured out how to deal with it.
Right.
Now for a transition to sports.
Yeah.
So, like I mentioned earlier, Michael Jordan was probably one of the first professional athletes that I was able to photograph, like from a sideline, and definitely an amazing experience covering the Bulls' 6 championships when I was in Chicago, and a couple significant moments along the way. This was a photo called The Shrug, which was the 1992 NBA Finals. Michael Jordan hit, I think, 6 3-pointers in the first half, and after the 6th one, he was heading back down court, and I believe it was Magic Johnson was an announcer for that game, and Michael just said, "Hey, what are you gonna do?" And so so this is what as a sports photographer your job is. It's to make the significant moment at an event. You can make the most amazing sports action photo of a touchdown in the first quarter, but if that team loses, it is to find the player of the game doing the most important play of the game. So this photo, this is hockey's, I think, the most difficult because you want to have the puck in the photo, but then it's so fast moving and the photo positions are not great. But this was one time where
That's a crazy shot.
it was almost like a Three Stooges routine. This one guy came up behind him, and then someone hit him in the face, and he fell over backwards.
That's amazing.
But once again, I try to cover sports in an artistic way. This was the Chicago Marathon in 2010. Just a very slow shutter speed, setting the camera on the ground. And I think it was probably a quarter of a second or a half-second exposure. But the feet were on the ground long enough to kind of be sharp. And so I did probably about 200 of these, and they were all interesting. So when you have children and you're a sports photographer, you become the de facto team photographer for every single sport that your children play. And so I'm in a relationship now with a woman, and her son is actually a pretty impressive mountain biker. This is not him. And so I'm the Marin Academy mountain biking team photographer. And this was a race a couple of years ago where it started raining and every biker wiped out on this turn. And I'm sorry to have to illuminate this kid's tragedy, but it made a good photo, and he actually got up and finished 20th in the race. So he was actually a success story.
Wow. So I have a question about the sports stuff, and especially for people, students who may be interested in getting into this. It seems like it's a different skill set to capture these like sport moments than it is to make an artistic kind of photograph, like the one of the marathon with all the feet on the floor.
Right.
That was an artistic thing. I can see your evolution to that. But these sports things, the guy getting hit in the face with the with the hockey stick, it seems like it's almost like an athletic type of set of, I don't know, like, muscle memory or
Yeah,
something like that. Can you elaborate on, like,
Yeah.
did you build that or?
Well, I think it helps a lot that I was a big sports fan, so I can kind of anticipate what I think is going to happen. But also, like, you'll hear sports athletes say that they got successful when the game slowed down. Like, you'll hear people say, on this touchdown run, I couldn't hear anything. Everything was going so slowly and whatever. And so it's the same way when I look through the viewfinder or sporting event. Like, I will photograph a play and it seems to be going at a normal speed. But if I go home that night and watch the replay on TV and it'll go by so quickly, I'll be like, how did I make that photo? So, yeah, so it definitely, I think, autofocus cameras now help a little bit.
Right.
But you still have to aim it in the right place and hit the shutter at the right time. So it's getting to a point, though, where a lot of these cameras are 30, 40, 100 frames a second. It's just like, so it's becoming like a movie where people can pull frames out. But I started in the focus days where you had to focus and you had to, like, you'd be photographing a football game and the play be coming towards you and you have to be winding the camera as you're shooting.
Oh, yeah.
So that was back when it took skill. So one advantage to being old, I can look back on my old days when I was skillful.
Oh, yeah.
Now I'm a button pushing monkey, so it's just, but it's still, you have to know, what you're looking for and find the position and compose it and try to photograph everything full frame and not have to crop in. Once again, humor is my favorite thing in photography. This was a Chicago Bears training camp, and this player, Gabe Karimi, was a rookie, and I don't think he knew where the players' bathrooms were. So during the middle of a practice, he walked into the stands and went to a porta potty. And so, of course, I followed. And then, thankfully for me, as he was coming out, this little boy showed up and this woman carrying an ice cream cone into the porta potty. I'm not sure what's going on there, but Gabe Karimi walked out. He took 2 steps, looked at me and went, "Oh shit," 'cause he knew. And this was probably one of the first photos that went viral. And since it was the Chicago Bears, I named this one "Does a Bear Shit in the Woods?" And so. Once again, back to being the team photographer. This is my son playing middle school football in Yorkville, Illinois, back in the day. He's one of the offensive linemen in the middle there.
That's beautiful.
And, this was the suburbs of Chicago. I lived way out in the western suburbs for a while, and this football field was fantastic. It was kind of elevated, and just these beautiful Midwestern clouds. This was probably one of my favorite sports stories ever. It's the San Rafael Pacifics. It's a independent baseball team. They're not affiliated with any teams. They're kind of the last stop before guys say, okay, I'm giving up my dream of being a baseball player. But the great thing was they just gave me full access to the locker room, the clubhouse, anywhere I wanted to go. And so I followed them for a season 3-4 years ago, and they happened to, of course, win the championship. It was only a 4-team league, so they had a 25% chance of winning. But this was, my favorite photo, the champagne selfie cigar photo. And then, of course, the Bay Area professional sports teams have done really well since I got here in 2014. This is the Giants World Series win in 2014. My first time shooting surfing at Mavericks. Another kind of weird moment after a Chicago Bulls game on a Halloween night. This is Super Bowl 50 in Santa Clara. Wow. I'm always trying to find a different angle of a oft photograph moment, and the Super Bowl trophy is, kind of presentation type thing you're used to seeing on the stage, a player holding it up. So I try to go out of my way to find a different angle. And as the Broncos were walking around the field with the trophy, I actually sat on the ground underneath them and kind of had a first-person perspective of an offensive lineman reaching up to grab the trophy from his teammate.
Oh, wow.
This was U.S. Olympic gymnastics in San Jose. And, once again, this is how I construct a photo. Like, I saw the $sign and the music symbol that the gymnast had put on the balance beam to kind of mark their starting position. And then I just framed that up and I waited for either a foot or a hand or face to come down into that area. And really nice reflected light up from the chalk on the bottom of this foot, and nice little curl. And of course, an arena with a dark background is always helpful too.
That's beautiful.
Thank you.
So would something like this run?
No.
Right.
That didn't run.
Yeah.
No, I'm not even sure. Now we have something called like photos of the month.
Right.
And I don't remember then if we did. But I don't think this was ever published, but maybe I'm wrong. This was a Chicago Little League team. Another thing I always try to do is I try to photograph from a sitting or a kneeling position, just to kind of, I really like that angle. It makes people look very heroic. And this baseball player, I think, was like 4'3". He was just like the tiniest guy. And so just getting down underneath in the moment when his grandmother came out over and wiped away a tear after he'd lost. It's like if I just kind of shot everything standing up, even though I'm not tall, I just don't like that angle. I think standing up and shooting is the worst angle you can do. So I either get low or get high, or just try to find something besides the standing angle. So the Warriors, I got here and they all started winning. So I think I'm responsible for that. So thank you. And but Steph Curry is one of the best athletes ever to photograph. One, because he'll celebrate like this in a preseason game. So it's this happened to be Game 7 of the Western Conference Finals in 2016. This was in Cleveland after the first championship. And then the championship parade in Oakland. Once again, just finding the background first, and then waiting for a moment to come through, and having the luck of Steph Curry to be silhouetted against the kind of the side of the building there, and his daughter Riley.
Oh, right.
And this was during the pandemic. Covering sports in the pandemic was definitely a challenge, but because we couldn't be courtside anymore, but it had its advantages. It's much easier to make a good photo from an elevated position. You can kind of cover the whole field, and it's much easier to to kind of find good moments. This was after a 49ers playoff win, I think in 2019. After the game, at least pre-pandemic, we would run around on the field trying to shoot emotion and celebration. And Marcio Sanchez, a photographer from the Associated Press, like plowed me over, and I was like fell to the ground. And I looked up, and Richard Sherman came over to help me up off the ground, and just continued to photograph as he reached down to pick me up. And once again, another photograph that was never published, because like, what's the context of it? Dumb Chronicle photographer falls down, player picks him up, so. But definitely, this is my photography mantra. Just always be making photographs, and maybe one of them will turn out nice. Another weird pandemic moment where, even though there were no fans, the security guard was still there, and I'm not sure what he was guarding, but he, if any of those cardboard cutouts ran on the field, he was going to get them. This is a 49ers playoff game in Dallas in January. The AT&T Stadium in Dallas, or in Arlington, is known for this beautiful light on certain days. Each end of the stadium has these big picture windows, and every photographer was waiting for this moment, and it happened with 13 seconds left in the first half. And so we had about 45 seconds of this light, and then the half ended, and then by the time the second half started, the light was gone. But once again, you got to have a little bit of luck, and the 49ers happen to be in this spot at this moment, and except for even though I really like the light too, I like the repetition of the players and the movement of it. And this was a week later, NFC Championship game. Even though we don't cover the LA Rams, when a moment like this happens right in front of you, it's something you want to cover. It's Odell Beckham Jr. just praying before the national anthem. Another recent photo, Duke, Texas Tech, Sweet 16 game at Chase Center. I've made a lot of photos like this in my career of one player reacting to a foul, but I've never had 4 all lined up in a row. And this was last weekend in Minneapolis, the women's Final Four. And this is Aaliyah Edwards from UConn. And you know, her hair went down past her waist, and like I just was so distracted the entire game of just photographing her and her hair flying all around. It just added this extra dimension of fun to the game. This was the championship game where Stanford had lost in the semifinals, so we no longer, had that as an interest point. But the paper was good enough to let me stay and photograph the championship game just for fun, and we did publish some photos from it too. We did cover it. We have our sports editor is female, and we have a columnist who's female, and a couple of writers who are female. So the Chronicle is like the most diverse newspaper I've ever worked at. It's fantastic. I'm the only white male photographer, so they can't get rid of me because of the diversity. You got to have the diversity.
They need the diversity.
They need the diversity of the white man. So that was all just my newspaper work. That was my day job, and that's what I do. That's what I get paid for. But the rest of what I'm going to be showing you, as Timothy had talked about earlier, my personal project, things that I photograph for me. And I think sometimes when I'm working for my newspaper job, I tend to photograph what I think other people want, what my editors want, what the writer wants, what the viewers want. But my personal projects are how I see the world. And one of my favorite things to do is street photography. I started doing it in 2010. Before that, for some reason, I had no really reason to do street photography. I thought, well, what's the point of it? There's no news value to it. And then after years and years and years of going into an event and having people know you're a photographer and either overact or hide, or, I just wanted pure photography moments. And I felt street photography is really the best place to kind of make moments that, no one is watching. They don't know they're being photographed. And I know there's this whole element, which I respect, of consent and lack of consent, and being creepy and being on the streets and photographing people when they don't know they're being photographed. And I understand people having a problem with that. But for me, it's a celebration of life. I want to show what the world looks like. It's kind of a historical document, but in an artistic way. So I understand people, not many, but some have come up to me and say, did you take my photo, and delete that photo? And I of course, willingly do. But most people, if they do ask, I will explain to them what I'm doing, and most of them are like, "Oh, can you send me that photo?" So, but I do understand people having a problem with it. So it's definitely kind of an issue, and it's illegal in some places too. In Europe, I think in Paris, it's illegal to photograph someone on the streets without their knowledge.
Right.
So,
Right. Now, before you get into this, can I
Sure.
pause a little bit? And so, Scott it was interesting for me to kind of see his path as a photojournalist. And you did explain how you got into this, and it's almost like it did not sound like you were a photojournalist go-getter as a young man. It sounded like you stumbled into this and someone said, can you use flash? And you lied and said you could, stuff like that. Now, I guess I'm pausing here because I want to see if anyone in class or in our Zoom rooms has questions about, that a career as a photojournalist and how that maybe has changed now. And is it as simple now as being like, can you put a flash on your camera?
Yeah, there's definitely less jobs. But I feel like a young photographer has more opportunities now than they did back when I was first starting out. Because when I first started out, there's no way that I could just be right at the Chicago Tribune to start out with, because you had to work your way up. You had to pay your dues. You had to work at small newspapers. But now, I think a lot of it is financial aspects, where a lot of the photographers that get hired are the interns that come into the newspaper and they work, and then the people like them and they have a job opening, and like, oh, we have a job opening for $26,000 a year. And so, a young, eager photographer is like, I'll take that. Yeah. And when I started out at the Daily Calumet, $4.25 an hour, I worked 16 hours a week, but I had luckily I had my parents supporting me, and so it definitely was something where I wasn't living in the Bay Area working, making $60 a week. But so there are less opportunities, but if you have talent will find its way. Or if you're a great marketer, if you're a great, that helps too. So I think there is a greater need now than ever for journalism, visual journalism. And so, I would not be, deterred by the fact that there's less jobs, but it definitely is a different system. It's no longer the step ladder thing where you start out this small paper, you get to a little bit bigger paper, a little bit bigger paper, biggest paper,
Right.
and then you retire at that big paper.
Right.
Now with, so many photographers have been, laid off and fired over the years from downsizing, and then, there's a lot of freelance photographers. So it is definitely difficult to make it go. You almost have to have a side job or something.
Mhm.
And, and I think I'll talk about it later, but, the NFT space is another possible stream of revenue that people can use to support their photography. But once again, that's just as fickle as anything else, where there's really no rhyme or reason to what sells and what doesn't sell.
Mhm.
But yeah, it definitely, times have changed, and so, but
It's not over.
yeah. Well, the thing though is that when I first started in photography, there were two ways you could see my photography. You could subscribe to the Daily Calumet, or I can bring the photos to your house and show them to you. And so now, I go out on the streets of San Francisco, I make an image, I stop on the corner, I put it on Instagram, and 10 seconds later, someone in Japan says, I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. That is the advantage that is now, that you can get your work out there. You can be your own publisher. You can be your own photo evangelist. You can just spread your photography worldwide, and there's no limits to it. And so, I think it makes it, great work more evident because there's so much mediocre work out there.
Mhm.
So I think good photography is very, it stands out. And so it definitely, it's a different world. It's just a totally different world. But if you want to do it, it's possible to do it.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that.
Yeah.
It's funny, so I used to be in newspapers, and so I still have friends who are in newspapers. And if you just, kind of like you were saying earlier, if you listen to other voices, they tell you newspapers are done, journalism is done. And then I talk to my friends working in it, and they're like, well, we're still here, we hire people,
Yeah.
So it doesn't maybe rule the world in the same way it used to,
Right. Right.
But it seems like, there's space for good photojournalists.
Yeah. There was a portrait art photographer on Twitter the other day who said that the decisive moment is dead, that no one is interested in the decisive moment anymore, that the decisive moment is boring. And I was just like, what? Like, what do you mean? It's like, so all the work done in Ukraine is valueless and stuff. So I don't know what his context was, if he was just talking about within the world of NFTs or selling, or just his own personal aesthetic or whatever it is. But I don't think the decisive moment will ever die. I think it takes of all the skills in photography, doing an image of the decisive moment is the most difficult thing to do. Yeah, you can stumble upon it once or twice or three times in your career if you happen to be in the right place. And that was the word he used. He used stumble upon. He said that every decisive moment was just stumbled upon,
Right.
and not really made. And art photography is made, and like, there's a very small grain of truth in that, but it's a lot more than just stumbling upon something. But once again, a lot of Pulitzer Prizes were someone being in the right place at the right time, F8 and be there. But if you consistently are a good photographer, there's a little bit more than just being lucky. So,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
but you do have to be lucky.
Yeah, no, I see that. So does anyone here have any questions? Yeah.
I have so many questions, but I narrowed it down. So when you're working for a publication, for example, if you're at a hockey game, I can imagine you take thousands of pictures. Are you making the final say on what photo they get, or do they ask for every photo that you took?
Yeah, so they'll only get what I send them, and very rarely will they ask for anything else, unless they say like, oh, we're doing a story on the assistant coach, which they'll always tell you after the game is over too. It's like, oh, by the way, we're doing a story on the assistant coach. Do you have any photos of them? I'm like, why would I? But no, like I pretty much, give them the pre-edit, and that's kind of what they go with. And sometimes I'm insulted. They'll be like, and this shows that I didn't have a great game, where after I send like 30 photos, I'd be like, do you have anything else? Like, oh no. When they're asking, do you have anything else?
Yeah, that's a
It's
bad
like,
call.
yeah, that's not good.
Wow.
But but most of the time they trust me, and you know, I'm sending my best photos first, because yeah, I've been in this so long that I kind of know, I know the best photos. You know, I photograph like a Warriors game. When I shot a Chicago Bulls NBA Finals game, I would shoot 9 rolls of film, which would be 300 plus photos. Now at a Warriors game, I shoot 5,000 photos. But the thing is that I know where the good photos are, and I will either tag them on the back of my camera. So when I go in, you know, I know exactly what photos I'm looking for to transmit. Because at a Warriors game now, the game starts at 7 o'clock. You have to have photos in before 7, and then you have to send photos at halftime, and then you have to send photos after the game. So you're constantly, in a baseball game, I have my laptop right in front of me, and I'm sending photos while the game's going on, in between innings. You know, so it's like you're just constantly transmitting photos. Where when I first started out, you would just go back to the newspaper, develop your film, and you know, so it definitely now they constantly want photos. You know, if I'm photographing a funeral, like I photographed the memorial service the other day that started at 3 p.m. They're like, we need photos by 2 p.m. Okay, you know, here's someone vacuuming a carpet, you know, it's just like, you know, so they just want photos now constantly. And the bad thing I think about that sometimes is that they'll get the first photos you send in up on the internet, and then like then they won't update it ever again, because we have images. You know? So a lot of times my best photos happen near the end of an event, and they just never see the light of day because, you know, there's already images online, or the deadline of the newspaper is already passed. So, but yeah, it's like I have a lot of control over what images they see.
Because of like deadlines and stuff, and like how you're saying you have to like send some of your photos like right there kind of thing. How much of your work do you actually like edit after the fact? Like have to like either Photoshop or color grade or anything like
Yeah, so as a photojournalist, we do very little editing Photoshop work because, you know, one, they don't want to change anything that's reality. But if I shoot something with the wrong color balance, you know, and it's blue, so is it unethical to change it to what it looked like? So no, because you want to make it look up what it looked like. But you know, it definitely, you know, it's becoming more and more get the photos in, because now they can't even wait for us to download the photos onto our laptop and send them in. Now, you know, we have an app on our phone where we wirelessly transmit the photos to our phone, and then we send them on our phone. Like, so they want them like immediately, and then they won't go up online for 45 minutes. But anyways, that's not my department. But yeah, it's you know, it almost gets to the point now where a lot of the decisions that are made on which photos run have nothing to do with the content of the image. It's a lot of its shape. Oh, we need a horizontal, you know, but I have the greatest vertical ever. We need a horizontal, you know, like there's, you know, this kind of, you know, get it in first is so important, especially at wildfires or natural disasters. Like, they want to get photos or videos up as fast as possible so that we're the first thing when things are Googled, that we're the first thing up there. So and, you know, I've always prided myself on getting work in quickly, and I think I'm good at it, but I do think it kind of affects the end product of getting the best images published. But once again, that's why you know, if you want to see my best images, go to Twitter and Instagram and Facebook. That's when they'll be. So, yes.
As a photojournalist, I've never really understood. Do you do any of your writing or just the photos?
Well, I have to write the captions, and I will occasionally write. I used to write a lot more. I used to have a blog where I would write a lot, and I enjoy writing. But you know, now for the stories, you know, we don't. You know, maybe once a year we'll do a story for a visual essay or something, but most of the time we're too busy just taking photographs. And
yeah, I was interviewed by LA Times one time, and the photographer had a writer with her.
Right.
Which me as a photographer would make me more comfortable because writing is not much stronger.
Right.
So that's kind of what I was wondering. Like, can I be a photographer and have a writer? And,
yeah.
And I don't know if that's always the way it works or just something.
Yeah. Well, the more skills you have, the better. But you can definitely just focus on one. But it's an age-old fight in newspapers. The word people against the the photo people, it's just like in the photo people, we always feel so discriminated against, and we're always like, it's not fair. We're like, no, they don't, and it's true, but but there's part of this, like, it's a job, and we understand what the dynamic is. And in some newspapers, I've worked at some newspapers where photo had the power. And the Joliet newspaper I used to work at, I would photograph something and I'd be like, here's the photo that goes on the front page, here's the inside photo. And then they're like, okay, and so that was a little too much, but I did enjoy those days. So, but now it's, I send photos in, bunch of stuff going on that I don't know what happens, and then it pops out the other end in publication. So, and I don't get too involved in it.
Interesting. Yeah, JD.
You cover like a really wide range of stories and topics, but do you have one that you're most passionate about covering when it comes to photojournalism?
Good question. I do just anything that has emotion in it, so it, like in this, I don't, the most dramatic photos I make are wildfires for sure. I don't want wildfires to happen, but if wildfires are going to happen, right now, that's probably the thing that is the most incredible thing that I photograph, and they're just it's unbelievable, the power of them and the things that happen. So I guess wildfires, although I need to like knock on wood, because it's, you just never know what's going to happen. You can stay safe, but you never know when a tree can fall on you or a power line or something. So it's super dangerous, but you can be as safe as you can be. But yeah, I think, but once again, I love shooting sports still, and just an assignment where they say go to someone's house and just hang out, make photos of them. That works for me too. So I do love everything, but it's hard to choose. It's like, which of my kids is my favorite? Yes.
So I know Kevin Bacon is doing the homeless series.
Yes.
Do you ever collaborate with them?
Yeah, I've done many things with them. I've gone out on a lot of the homeless counts, and we've done a lot of stories. So, the Chronicle seems to have a really, like right now, our focus is on homelessness and drug use in San Francisco. And I'm just finishing up a year-long story on SROs and some of the worst SROs. And so I've been spending a lot of time in the Tenderloin lately. But yeah, so it's definitely something that the Chronicle is trying very hard. But it's a really difficult problems to solve, obviously. But I think the best way to, get the word out there is to show images of it, because, that's where people kind of see and like, oh, because everyone I meet, you have this idea of what the Tenderloin is and who the people in the Tenderloin are, and it's totally wrong. Like the vast majority of the people are really good people, and some are suffering from mental illness, and some of them are kind of trapped in drugs, but they're good people. It's just that they kind of have ended up where they are. And so I think that's my job, is to, because it's easy just to walk by someone laying on the sidewalk and just ignore them, and I do that every day. But they're still a human being, and you have to respect that. And so there's just so much you can do as an individual. But Kevin's a really great writer, and he's his whole career has been to try to help the homeless. So that's pretty admirable on his part.
Excellent questions. We have some from the online. Sure. So I see there are some questions in the chat here, but does anyone have any questions they would like to bring up?
I like the honesty of the chat. The only one I saw was first question ever.
Yeah, I'm looking at the chat right now. I'm seeing something about parents shocking that has the worst question ever. Yeah, I don't know what that is. So you folks online, no one has any questions? speak up or forever hold your peace. Oh, Andrew has a question. Okay.
Yeah, so excluding like the whole, excluding the internet and social media, how it changed the newspaper industry, it is pretty apparent. In the last 6 to 10 years, a certain floor being very memorable and 2 summers also being memorable. Do you think as a photojournalist and or journalist that you know, has it changed to be in the industry?
I haven't noticed any change, but I've also been blessed to kind of work at newspapers that have continued to think that what I do is important and support what I do. But I have a lot of friends who aren't that fortunate, and so my personal experience, no, but I know other people have, and there's also this. As a staff photographer, I look at freelance photographers and like this jealousness of, oh, I wish I was a freelance photographer. And every freelance photographer I come across, I talk to, are like, you're so lucky to have a staff job. Wow, you're so lucky, and I'm like, ooh, freelance, it's like, so, so I think, you just have to kind of, I don't know, I don't think about it too much, but, the industry as a whole definitely has suffered, and I think in general over the last 5 to 10 years, like news is being replaced by opinion, and so like that is kind of the biggest change I've seen, is where it doesn't matter anymore what the actual facts are. It's what someone thinks the facts are, and of course a lot of that is part of the political rhetoric, and but yeah, it's just. I think that's the biggest change I've seen. And I'm the same way, where like the news I consume, I tend to go to the opinion too. It's much more sensationalistic. It's not as, it's not like eating your vegetables. It's just all dessert. And so it's very seductive to just go and, and I'm a sports fan, and I listen to a lot of sports talk radio just to kind of keep up on my sports. And the people with the wildest hot takes are the ones that, you listen to that. Oh, that's outrageous, and I remember, during, the Trump years, I was just on outrage all the time. I just wanted to be outraged. I just wanted to be outraged by Trump constantly. And that's like, I spent 4 years just listening to podcasts and news, just being outraged. And then now that Biden is president, I don't really consume those podcasts anymore, because I'm not interested in mansion and cinema's view of the world, so I've just tuned that out, and now I'm onto something else, which is horrible. It's like I should be out there, listening to stuff that educates me, but I'm just like a typical consumer like anyone else, and I kind of consume what I think people shouldn't consume. So it's hard for me to argue with what they.
Yeah, because that's why I noticed when during his administration, it's like the journalism industry has definitely changed. Maybe because his right that he can put out fake news, whereas you honestly don't know who's telling the truth at some point.
Right.
Now a lot of times, I did notice that a lot of news outlets, they would cover stories. A lot of them would end or they'll cover those stories around their opinion. Like I said, obviously media bias. So
yeah.
A lot of times that would be Fox News.
Yeah.
They're every story. It's not like it's based off their opinion on something, versus if I go to another outlet and just say, hey, this happened. This is our quote. This is what happened.
Right.
Great.
We all have biases. And of course, what I photograph is, when I go to a protest, like I'm in control of what my narrative is. And so, that's something that, I probably should think more about. It's like, am I really photographing the truth, or am I photographing my truth, or, what am I doing? So, but it's.
Have you ever gone into an argument like of that situation with one of your editors, where you submit photos and then it's something that you express, hey, you should probably cover these photos and you should publish a story of that hand, but you say, no, I want these. I regard that certain situation.
Yeah, for me, like the problems I have usually have to do with editors pre-visualizing an assignment, like what they think something is going to happen, and that doesn't happen, and then they ask me why I didn't photograph the thing that didn't happen that they thought was going to happen, you know, or also there'll be a lot of these kind of fake premise stories where, like, you know, this is not a big deal, but, you know, a couple weeks ago, they said, oh, people are coming back, they're flocking back to San Francisco. The workers are flocking back. Please go photograph lunch hour in downtown San Francisco. We want to see crowds. We want to see people filling the parks. And I go out at lunchtime and there's 2 people, you know, it's just like, you know, and so then I'm the idiot. Well, where are these photos of people flocking? Scott, we go back out tomorrow, get more photos of these people flocking. It's just like, they're not flocking. So anyways, so yeah, that's a struggle, but I think also that's because a lot of editors are in their living room every day. You know, I feel sorry for them. You know, they're working from their homes and they're not really out in the world anymore. And so they just kind of have to rely on what the writers are telling them, who are also working from their couches at times. So, you know, but you know, that's kind of small issue.
Here's a question from Daniela. What would you recommend to someone who is working into entering, probably who is looking into entering this industry? What are the most important skills to develop? Grant writing, personal projects, pitching, networking with editors?
Ooh, all those are good. But I feel like at least in the photography world, the photographers that seem to grab the most attention now are ones that have a body of work that they've been working on for, and you know, and they just kind of, you know, make it a cohesive thought, and then they drop that on the world, whether on social media or whatever, where, you know, there'll be a lot of, like, there's a photographer from Chicago, Christian Lee, who just spoke an SF camera work the other night, and he's been doing a series of portraits on African Americans who own guns, and just brilliant work. And it was his idea, his story. He's gone out there and researched it and photographed it, and you know, he's making a career based on the fact that he's introduced himself to the world with this body of work. And so back in the day, when I started out, you would have to win photo contests to get attention. You'd have to enter these thing called clip contests, which were, you know, you would cut a picture out of the paper and you'd send it in and hopefully you'd win, or a year-end contest. But the contests now are not kind of the path. It's more, you know, the work you do and you show and share on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook, and a lot of photographers are discovered now on social media. But you know, it's difficult now. You almost have to go out and support your own journalism, and then, you know, kind of prove that you can do it. It's that old catch-22 of, well, how can I get hired to do something if I have to do it first before I can do it, you know, or whatever, you know.
But you mean fund your own projects.
Right. And it doesn't have to be like, I'm going to go to Ukraine. It can just be, I'm going to do a story on my community, someone in my community, and I'm going to photograph, you know, the local, you know, bike club for the next 3 months, you know, 1 day a week. And then after 3 months, you have a body of work. And then you say, here's a story on this cool bike club. And, you know, so it doesn't have to be something, you know, like I'm going to travel the world, and, you know, it can just be something in your community. And I think that actually shows more about you as a photographer and a journalist, because that's what I do every day. I photograph my community. You know, I don't, you know, yeah, maybe twice a year I'll get to go out of the state or out of the city. But most of the time I'm just wandering around San Francisco. And so just kind of proving that you can kind of make great images from daily mundane things, I think is a great way to show that you have talent. But networking is super important. Someone sends me their work and I like it, and then they ask me for, you know, introduce them to someone, I definitely will. But when it's someone I don't know them, I don't know their work, the odds of me doing that are close to zero.
Yeah.
So networking is super important. But you have to kind of do it in a very elegant way. You can't, you know, force yourself on someone. You have to kind of, you know, but, you know, I'm always constantly, you know, except for Gary, who has to drag me out to lunch. But most people, you know, if you invite me out to coffee or something, I'll, you know, hopefully I can find time to, you know, just, you know, sit down and talk to you a little bit. But when it comes down to it, it's on your back. You kind of have to do it yourself. And, you know, I was luckily had this really shallow growth, spike or whatever it'd be called, or curve. And I, I spent, let me see, I started in my first 5 years were very rough photographically. And I thought I was doing well, but when I look back on it, I wasn't really that good. And then I think I really kind of, hit my stride in my mid 30s when I had been in the profession for, over 10 years. So, now it seems like people don't have that time anymore. You got to do it now. You got to prove it now when you're 22 or 21. And if not, sorry. But
You feel that's the perception, or you feel that's the reality?
I think that's the perception that people think, that they get really discouraged quickly. And then if they not successful, of course, sweeping generalization. But, because, a good example is this kid, Ethan Swope. He's 19 years old. He does, he probably is, has some financial means behind him. But he's just a go-getter. He's, he loves doing spot news and news photography. So, he's been out there doing wildfires and floods, and he, goes places and photographs news. And, at 19, he's already established himself as, an up and comer. He's going to be our intern next summer.
Did he go to Ukraine?
He went to Ukraine.
No.
He was in Ukraine. He went to Lebanon last year. He did some work in Mexico, which he's just kind of going and doing himself. So, like everyone doesn't have to do that. You can just go to, Oakland or Fresno or LA or, wherever and photograph amazing things in California. You don't have to go to Ukraine, but he's decided that's what he wants to do. And he's, of course he's, he's talented and he's motivated. And so it's, like usually people are, you have one skill, like, even though I'm kind of an organic marketer, but I'm someone who really, I spent many years just kind of waiting to be discovered and not kind of putting myself out there, because like, using a sports metaphor, Michael Jordan, was one of the top talents in the NBA, but what he had was that incredible drive and everything was a competition to him. If you were playing checkers with him, he would, try to kill you. And so it was just that, the combination of incredible talent and incredible drive, where like LeBron James is much more physically gifted than Michael Jordan ever was, but he doesn't have that maniacal drive that Michael Jordan has. I think if, because LeBron James, if he had Michael Jordan's drive, not that he doesn't have a drive because he's incredibly driven, but Michael Jordan's was just off the chart. So anyways,
Right.
But yeah, so there's 1,000 ways to success, but there's also 1,000 ways to failure. So it's just kind of what works best for you. And but yeah, all those ideas that you have, the networking is super important. Personal projects, super important. Grant writing, which is something I've never done, but that is a really great way to fund your own work. Pitching stories is really probably, that's something you should do, but probably, is less successful than probably some of the other things, because it's very difficult for someone from outside, at least the Chronicle, to pitch something and then have them, have the editors trust someone they don't know to do a story or to, so, but yeah, I think the personal projects thing is super important.
Right. So a couple just comments here. Meryl S. says, not a question, just a comment. It's so interesting to hear you repeat every single thing I experienced over my newspaper career. It's validating. So it's good to hear. And then from our director, Adrian Powell, says, could we talk about the NFTs a bit?
Okay, so let me cruise through my personal projects real quick, and then I'll start talking about NFTs for sure.
Sure.
So so here's just some of my daily street photography. I think it's important to look at the work of other photographers, current photographers, and ooh, that's nice.
Yeah.
I think it's important to look at the work of current photographers and also past photographers and not copy them, but be inspired by them. This photographer named Elliot Erwitt, who did a lot of street photography with dogs and still does, is very inspirational to me. And so like when I made this photo, I wasn't really thinking of him, but once I made the photo and looked at it, it really gave me an Elliot Irwood vibe. So I think, that's a good way to kind of help form your own vision, is to look at other people's photography and study photography and know who came before you.
Now I love your street photography, and it seems to me like its voice is more uniquely yours, at least in my take. Where your photojournalism seems like it's still yours, but it needs to look like photojournalism.
Yes,
if you know what I mean.
Yes, for sure.
And I'm wondering, besides Irwin, as we look at these, were there other influences?
Well, Vivian Meyer, very
Yeah.
influential.
Yeah.
When I was 13 years old, before I knew I wanted to be a photographer, or never even thought about street photography, I saw a documentary of Gary Winogrand.
Oh yeah.
And I was just like, who is this and what is this? Because he was just hopping around New York with this Leica, just this crazy character. And he's probably my biggest street photography inspiration. But Joel Meyerowitz is, and there's a lot of great street photographers out there. But San Francisco, I've also had the luck to work in Chicago and San Francisco, two of the great street photography cities, and of course New York, and I love LA too. But then also, like, I'll use this is all my street photography is done with an iPhone with the Hipstamatic app, and I'm like one of 10 people still using the Hipstamatic app, which was very popular 10 years ago. But I use it just as my everyday camera too. Whenever I'm traveling or just walking the dog, or just things like that. And so this is not my dog, but it's just that I guess I just enjoy seeing the world in photography. And so it's I think when I'm on my free time in a city, I'm probably not good company, because I'm just constantly distracted by what I see, and just looking for unusual, fun little daily moments. This is downtown Los Angeles, which I think is one of the Broadway in downtown LA. I think it's one of the greatest street photography streets in America, even though it's kind of been changing, being gentrified, which is unfortunate. This was South Mountain in Phoenix when I was there for spring training, just kind of going on a hike, and came across a Mennonite family up on top of this overlook. I'm like, one of my big street photography cliches is juxtaposing people in front of advertising billboards, and I always find that endlessly fascinating, although it's kind of easy to do. But and then I don't do too many photographs, street photography of the homeless in San Francisco, but if someone's carrying a clock down the street, I definitely will photograph them. This is my favorite building. This is right by Union Square. I love photographing this building. It's a great corner. And you just never know what you're going to see as you're walking down the street. All my street photography is done while I'm walking, so it's always, there's kind of this extra layer of serendipity that comes in when you're just walking down the street, and you never know when a skateboarder is going to just fly by you. I still don't understand where this kid came from, or he like dropped from the sky, but it just kind of was like, I think this is where being a sports photographer helps my street photography, where you're kind of ready for fast action. But someone asked me the other day, is like, where did this kid jump off of? And I have no idea. It just kind of happened.
So are you working the situation, or are you just, oh, I got one shot and then I move
Yeah,
on?
like usually if you looked at my photojournalistic take, there'll be 20 images of kind of the same situation of me trying to find the angle. If you looked at my street photography, it'll like almost every photo is a whole different scene, or maybe it's me walking up through the scene and then out of it, and they'll always, for my street photography, editing is so easy, because there'll be one photo, it's like, yep, that's it.
Right.
And then the other 10 on each side of it, like they're just kind of almost, and then, but once again, it almost is just me. Like I said in the foreword to my book, I'm just fascinated by how people look, and people are just endlessly fascinating. And once again, always just trying to find fun little juxtapositions in daily life that are interesting. Smokers, smokers are the best for street photography. Everyone should take up smoking and vaping. And walk by me because it's the best.
There is like a darkness to those pictures, though, don't you think?
Yeah, so there's this photographer, Gregory Crutzen,
Yeah.
who, you know, creates these very cinematic scenes that he shoots at dusk, and he has the streets are watered down, and he has beautiful lighting and things like that. And I heard him speak once, and he said that his favorite images are the intersection of beauty and sadness. And I heard that, and I'm like, yep, that's what I love. I love beauty, the intersection of beauty and sadness. And so I think all my street photography aims for that. You know, there has to be a beautiness to it, but there also has to be a tinge of sadness. And I'm an optimist, and you know, and have had a great life, and like everything is rosy. But I just love sad movies. I love sad songs. I love, you know, sad photography. And so there's just something about it I'm really drawn to.
Mystery.
Mystery,
Yes. Is in that.
yes,
book,
very.
I think.
Yes. So then there's this whole kind of, you know, off of my street photography, I have a lot of different tangents. This is a body of work I did with photographer Logan Mock-Bunting, where it was for a site called Echo Site, where two photographers would have their work and they would blend them on this app called Blender, obviously. And so Logan sent me about 100 of his deep diving photos. He lives in Hawaii. And so I just spent a week or so combining them with my street photography, and just really had a great time doing that. And
Oh, wow.
you know, and so just, you know, just kind of a little artistic exercise that came and went over a week period, but I really enjoyed doing it. It's just a lot of fun.
I saw these images on either your site or on the internet somewhere, and I was
Yeah.
like, what's the deal with these? Because
Yeah,
I could
yeah.
tell it was another voice besides
Yeah.
yours. You know.
I definitely, I've been trying to sell these as NFTs. I sold one.
Oh, you
So, yeah. Oops. And so another personal project I've been doing, growing up in Chicago on the South Side, I was a White Sox fan, and I spent a lot of my youth at Comiskey Park, which was this aging concrete baseball stadium that smelled of urine and raw sewage, but you know, very rabid fan base, you know, not a popular team, you know, the very low payroll. And so I loved it when I was a kid. And then in 1990, the stadium was torn down and they built a really boring new stadium. And so when I got to the Bay Area, I photographed, you know, at the Giants stadium. It's like, oh, this is beautiful. It's like one of those beautiful stadiums. Yawn.
Yeah.
You know, it's just like it's like I'm not interested in that. But I went to the Oakland Coliseum. I'm like, yes, this is amazing. I love this funky fan base. The place is falling apart. You know, like it's just every day there's something weird and different about it. So I started, you know, collecting photographs 9 seasons ago when I first got here, and I'm continuing this. And I want this to be a book at some point, probably when the stadium, you know, either the A's leave town or they build the new stadium or whatever. But still, like before a game, I'll wander around, or sometimes I'll go on my off day and just spend a whole game just seeing what I can see. And you know, the pandemic added a whole nother layer of interest because there was that whole season of no fans and cardboard cutouts. But most of the time, it's just I'm focusing on the fans and a little bit on the stadium, and you know, and every once in a while I'll photograph the game going on, but not very often.
That's so beautiful.
Thank you. But it's, you know, just baseball is, of course, is an old white male is my favorite sport, and I really enjoy it. But also just, you know, the experience of going to a baseball game, it's different than any other sport because you really don't have to pay attention to the game. You can just look up every once in a while. And there's a lot of things going on the concourse throughout the entire game. It's not like football where everyone goes in their seats, and then at halftime they all rush up, and then they go back to their seats, and then they all leave. You know, baseball, there's this constant flow of fans on the concourse. And once again, just, you know, the Oakland Coliseum has this great walkway that goes around the seating area. And, you know, so I do a lot of my work in the first row of seats there. But it's definitely, you know, my favorite thing to do, street photography. I guess this is sort of street photography. And the A's whole situation is so weird and funky. Like I don't even know what they were going for here, you know. But I appreciate the effort.
I have a question.
Yes.
When you go to like the sports games and stuff, do you wear like a badge that says like that you're a photographer?
Yeah, so at the beginning of each season, they'll give us usually like a season-long pass, that we wear around our neck. And so that's why I'm able to kind of on my off day, just kind of go in and wander around. Like Warrior games, I think we have to do it now game by game because they don't want 100 photographers showing up. And it used to be back in, like 5-10 years ago, they wouldn't assign your seat. You would just kind of show up and sit wherever you want. But now, like in a Warriors game, we have our one seat and we have to stay there, which I don't like because I kind of like working, going for different angles. Football, you can still wander around the field. So each sport's a little bit different. Hockey is you have your one spot. It's usually a bad spot.
As a student, could they just go in and wander around and take pictures, or?
Well, like for like baseball is the best thing to do because you could buy a very cheap ticket and just photograph everywhere. That like I think baseball stadiums are the best place to just kind of make images. I would maybe one day I want to do the old 32 stadiums in one season type of thing, which would be fun. But yeah, like it's hard. Like there's certain sports like 49ers, the Warriors, like no one can afford those tickets. It's like unless you want to drop $400, to go to a Warriors game, it's kind of hard to go there.
Does the badge though make it so you kind of avoid the you just take my picture conversation?
Sometimes, but whenever I do this street photography, I hide my credential because I don't want them to know that I'm a photojournalist. But yeah, it's mostly just so security knows that we're allowed to be there. But like moments like this, like I just you walk it down the concourse and you see this coming towards you, you're just like,
That is an insane photograph.
Yeah, that's too funny. And so that I'll occasionally cover the game. Yes, Gary.
Scott, I noticed a lot of your Instagram pictures are from like waist level or do you frame them up or are you shooting literally from the hip?
Yeah, shooting. Yeah. So but basically, this is my. Of course, I don't even have to open the app, but of course I do just for. So like when I'm walking on the street, I'm just doing this. I'm just like going like this, or sometimes like this. And I've been doing it so long, where I can just kind of like right now I'm like maybe I can do this. So it's just all like I've been doing it for so long, and like I will. So that's how I do it, but it's mostly just walking, and also like in San Francisco, my favorite thing is the lost tourist look. Like I'll be like if I'm interested in photographing someone at a bus stop, I'll be like, oh, the bus is coming, it's kind of creepy, kind of weird, but it's like, it's for me, it's like kind of what I do. And I'll have a lot of people be like, can I help you? Like they think I'm just lost. I'm like, oh, no, I'm just, looking around or something. But yeah, so like it started out, I think maybe 15-20 years ago, where every time I photographed kids, they would just stare right at the camera. And I hate that. And so I just started, whenever kids were around, I just started shooting from the hip so that they would look at my face instead of the camera. And so then that just kind of translated. So when I started doing, street photography, it was just kind of natural because I just don't feel like this would be effective. So like, cause I think that, a lot of photographers will do it. Like if you see Gary Winograd, how he used to work, he have a like it here, then he'll see an interesting moment, and so, which I think is a more honest approach probably, where you're giving someone, at least the idea that they're being photographed, but it's just kind of how I do it. So it's.
You talk to them afterwards for names and.
No. Like the point of my street photography is no names, no captions. Just like if someone asks for like some of my street photography to be published someplace, I'll say Market Street, San Francisco, or Michigan Avenue, Chicago. That's the only caption information I'll give, because I don't even know what to write. And I don't really want to give it context. I want people to kind of create their own story and kind of imagine what happened or what this is about and stuff. So, you know, I think if I wasn't a photojournalist, I probably would have more information with it, but I think I'm rebelling against myself. Like I'm tired of being a journalist. I'm tired of getting names. And I'm tired of writing captions, you know, so this is kind of my excuse to not have to do that, you know. So another recent tangent of my street photography is I've gone back to the big camera, and I've started doing a series of San Francisco bus shelters at night. I was driving on 19th Avenue one foggy night, and I saw, you know, the beautiful red glow of a bus shelter, and I'm like, oh, that'd be an interesting photo essay. But it took me 8 years to figure that out. You know, I've been driving by bus shelters in San Francisco for 8 years and never really thought, well, maybe that would be kind of a cool photo essay. So I started doing this maybe in December and January. It was much easier to do it when it got dark at 4:30. You know, now when it's starting to get dark later and later, I'm doing less and less just because, you know, I got other things to do at night. But it's, for me, it's just, you know.
That's beautiful.
Thank you. So that's the San Francisco Mint right across from the Chronicle. But it's definitely, for me, like it's just another kind of fun thing to do. Like on the way in today, I saw 2 bus stops. I'm like, oh, I never saw those before. I need to come back and shoot those later. So you know,
That's great.
And this one I actually started doing just for NFTs. It was like, I've shot this just for NFTs, and I'll probably end up, you know, having it be published in the Chronicle at some point, but I'm gonna have to kind of talk to them about, well, can I retain the copyright? Because that's another thing with newspaper photography is I don't own the copyright to any San Francisco Chronicle photos I take. So I think that's why I tend to do a lot of personal projects where I do own the copyright, because then I'm able to sell those as prints or NFTs, where like my daily Chronicle work, like I can't sell.
What would you say is your main source of income for, as far as like?
Yeah, so I'm probably right now, I'm probably 50-50 on what I get paid at the Chronicle and what I make from some side jobs, shooting some weddings, doing NFTs, selling prints, book sales, things like that. So each year I set a goal of what I want to make outside my newspaper, and I kind of push it up like 20,000 each year. And so the NFTs has helped a lot this year. So another body of work I started 2 years ago. My girlfriend Kim and I were going up to somewhere up the coast to spend a night, and I'm like, what if I took like a 400mm lens on a tripod and I just set it, you know, just set it in the ocean and did long exposures. And so I decided to do that, and I went and I pushed the shutter, did like 10 of them, and I looked on the back of my camera, and I'm like, these are boring. You know, who cares about this? And you know, so then I'm like, what if I just move the camera around, you know, intentional camera movement? And so now I'll just go to the beach at sunset, and it'll usually start out at about a quarter second, you know, where it's a little bit brighter and there is, you know, a little bit of movement. But then, you know, as it starts getting darker and my exposures become a little bit longer, like a 3/4 of a second or a second, and I'm moving the camera around, it'll just get a little bit funkier and stuff like that. And so the first year I did this, I was just interested in just doing abstract photos of the waves. Like I wasn't interested in people or anything like that. And so just like whatever kind of cool creative things I could make, you know, with that. But then as a photojournalist, I was just like, oh, but there's people here, there's surfers, there's people walking on the beach. And so I just couldn't keep people out any longer. So over the last year, it's turned more into, you know, just, you know, photographing the people and the waves kind of all at the same time. And the really cool thing, like I'm not a technical photographer at all. Like I don't care about cameras. I don't care, you know, of course I like having the best cameras because of the images they produce, but like I don't want to talk about cameras. I don't care about lenses and things like that. But so like I understand a very little bit. And so I'm assuming that there's something with the way that the shutter, the rolling shutter maybe, because it's like this is probably 3/4 of a second exposure, but people are in there twice, you know, like why aren't they a continuous blur? why is it like, so I assume it's something someone probably knows, I don't. But anyway, so it's kind of one of the cool things about the process of me not knowing it's magic, that like all of a sudden things will show up and look different. And, but so this is another one of my little side hobbies. I mostly go to Rodeo Beach in Sausalito because it's fairly close to my home, and there's a kind of a cool rock outcropping and things like that. But once again, it's just beauty and sadness again, where they just kind of have this very melancholy feel to them. Some of them are a little more alien-like, but these are actually Ocean Beach. And like, I'm not concerned about true colors like I would be in photojournalism. Like, this is not how it looked in real life. But what I'll do is, I'll open up the photo in Photoshop and I'll hit auto levels and see what it does. And like, oh, that's weird. And so then I think I'll keep that, And so for me, this is not about reality. And it's also pushing back against me having to, not create weird things in my normal work. So, but once again, it's just, as this project has evolved, the people have gotten bigger in the frame. They started out really small, but now getting closer and closer, and the people are, becoming, just more of the main element of it than they were before.
They're beautiful in a way your work is not, that your other work is not. You know what I mean? Like, there is sensuality, and there is, I think the sadness is the least of all your photos, Yeah, very painterly and very, you feel nature.
Yeah, no, it definitely is. It's some expression of something. I'm not sure exactly what it is at this point, but and it's it's probably the most mainstream of my work. I feel that like the people that like I don't know if this was a mistake or not for my fragile ego, but I went to a photo portfolio review with a bunch of fine art photographers and editors and stuff, and it was really interesting. Like I didn't even dare show this work because I know they'd be like,
what did you go to, like review Santa Fe or something?
No, I went to the Photo Alliance here in San Francisco.
Oh yeah, no, it just happened.
Yeah. So I showed my street photography, and I showed my Common Ground project, which I'll show in a little bit. And it was interesting. Like, some people were like, "Oh, I love this, and this is," and then other people like, "I love this." This is, So it's really fascinating, kind of getting people's different opinions, and like one person, all they cared about was my book. Some of the photo quality wasn't very good. I'm like, well, that's not why I'm here. Like, that book was published 8 years ago. I'm not here to try to improve the quality of a book that was written 8 years ago. So it was hit and miss, but it was interesting. I kind of realized that the fine art world is a whole different beast that I'm not sure I want to really go into, because a lot of that is just about spending a lot of money to get your work out there and show it to people. It's a kind of a ego vehicle, and I have enough ego vehicles that are free. I don't need to pay for more. But but this work is great. I live in Marin, so a lot of the people I do yoga with love it, and and they'll buy prints. And I'm going to have a show this July on Art Walk Night in Mill Valley, so that'll be fun. But anyways, for me, it's this is good therapy for me, and I really enjoy it. It's fun, and like every time I go out, it's a whole body of work that is totally different. Like, the images are always different. They're rarely the same. And it's also sports photography, sort of, at the same time. All right, so this is my last thing I'll show. This is a project that started in 1994 and finished last November. So it started out as a daily assignment for a newspaper, the Daily Southtown. And the assignment was, go photograph Gene and Harlow Cagwin. They're cattle farmers in suburban Chicago. Harlow's 71, Gene's 62. They don't have any children, and they raise Angus beef cattle. So just go photograph them, spend a couple hours, and we're going to do a story on them. And so I did. I hung out with Gene and Harlow for a little bit. They were just working with their cattle. I think I went at noon, so like the light was horrible, just direct overhead. And so as I was leaving, I just kind of offhandedly said, hey, Gene and Harlow, can I come back and visit another day and take some more photographs? And like, sure. And so that was 1994. And so from 1994 to 2002, I would occasionally stop by the Cagwin farm. I was a single dad during that whole period. And so Mondays were the day when I was off work and my kids were in school. So mostly this entire farm project was photographed on Mondays. And so I would just show up with Eugene and Harlow. They had a very redundant lifestyle. You know, they would get up at 3 or 4 in the morning and work and, you know, come in for lunch and then work some more and then come in for dinner and go to bed. So it wasn't a lot of variety in the images, except for it was just Gene and Harlow's everyday life. And Harlow, as he began to age and be in his 70s, still be working every single day. You know, he started to suffer from arthritis and carpal tunnel. And, you know, so I photographed, you know, that deterioration of his body, but he still continued to work. And then in 2002, Gene and Harlow ended up selling their land to a subdivision developer. And on July 2nd, he walked out of his house, and 5 minutes later, they started tearing down the place he had lived for the previous 75 years. And so at this point, I had a whole body of work over an 8-year period of Gene and Harlow, and you know their triumphs and their losses and their struggles. And you know, it was very well awarded body of work. It was part of my portfolio that won National Newspaper Photographer of the Year. And at that point, I kind of thought the story was a complete thought and it was done. But then I started, you know, going back and photographing the subdivision being built on the farm. And Gene and Harlow were able to name the street after themselves. And then Alta was Harlow's mother's name. And so I continued to photograph the subdivision that was being built. And at that point, it was probably 2003, 2004. I said, well, maybe what if I found a family who lives in this subdivision and do a long-term story on them, and maybe they'll have a cow salt and pepper shakers that will tie this all together. I wasn't really sure how I was going to make this work, and so I met a family, a young couple. The wife was pregnant, and they lived on Cagwin Drive. And I approached them and I explained to myself, you know, I work at the Chicago Tribune, and I had just the Chicago Tribune Sunday magazine just in a story on the Cagwin farm work that I'd done. And then I said, I would like to photograph you. And they're like, oh yeah, I saw that project, that'd be great. But I just never went back. For some reason, I either didn't have time or I didn't, you know, there was something that wasn't right. And so 2004 became 2005, became 2006. And then in 2007, you know, I hadn't really even thought about the project much anymore. And I was giving a talk at a community college outside Chicago, and I showed my farm story, and a woman raised her hand and said, my name's Amanda, and I live in that subdivision. And I was like, oh, cool. And like, can I come visit you? And she's like, sure. And, you know, we're having a cul-de-sac wide Easter egg hunt this Saturday. Why don't you come and you can meet me and my neighbors. And so, you know, I met Amanda and her husband, Ed, and they had 4 children. 3 of them were triplets, and they had 2 dogs. One of them looked like a cow. And so I just started photographing in the subdivision. And I still did not really know what I was going to do with the photography or how I was going to make this work as a project. But then one day I photographed their oldest son, Ben, who was wrestling with his cousin, CJ, with a jump rope. And it reminded me of a photo of Harlow from years earlier wrestling with a calf. And so then I went home that night and I said, what if I put photos together as pairings or diptychs? And I told the story of this piece of land over time through pairings. And so at that point, I just kind of made that my goal. And every photo was kind of just happened, except for, you know, of course, I planned to do an aerial after I had an aerial of the farm. But most of them were things like this, where, you know, Katie would be pretending to mow the lawn, and I would, you know, photograph that. And then that night I would go back, you know, and try to find a farm image that matched it. Or their dog Noel tried to escape out of the yard one day when I was there. And I'm like, oh, I remember I have a photo of a cow with its head through the fence. And, and so it was kind of this continuous thing where, you know, I would make photos at the subdivision, and then I would go on my search for photos from the farm that would match it. And it would be really kind of fun because, you know, when I would photograph the dogs being fed, you know, I'd say, I know I have 3 cows being fed, but then I would find an image of Harlow with his back to the camera matching Ed's father, with his back to the camera. So it definitely, was kind of a cool, fun project. And this was an image where I knew I had the second story photo from Jean walking back from the farm. So one day when Amanda was cutting the lawn, I went up in one of the triplets' bedrooms and kind of photographed it out. And then when I put it together, it kind of had this cool kind of, where it looked like it's just one image, over 15 years of passage of time.
Oh, yeah.
And so that was just kind of the process where I would just go and hang out at the subdivision. And since Amanda was a photographer, their kids were very used to being photographed. So they wouldn't play up for the camera. They would just kind of go through their daily lives and, just finding fun moments. And so the cool thing was, I think I met Amanda in March of 2007. And then in February of 2008, I had 4 pages in National Geographic on this project. And then, then it became a book, and Media Storm made a video of it, which is a video company out of New York. And so it definitely has been like just, a fun thing. So the majority of the photos were taken probably 2007, 2008, 2009, that area. And then after that, after the book was published, I would just stop by occasionally and just kind of be updated on, what the family was doing. And then 4 or 5 years ago, Ed and Amanda decided to divorce. And so Amanda said she was going to stay in the house with the kids until they graduated high school. So at that point, I'm like, okay, I finally have an end date to this project. And so that was this past year.
Oh, these are wonderful.
Thank you. And so I have like hundreds of these now. And so when I give a presentation, it's hard to narrow them down because I love them all.
I don't think I've ever seen a project like this. You know what I mean? That has that kind of like the historical kind of shift there.
Yeah, it's definitely, I think the passage of time is something that's difficult to chronicle at times, but, I always tell young photographers, go out and photograph like in their community, photograph what things look like, just photograph buildings and then make prints of them and put them away for 25 or 30 years. And then when you bring it back out, and people will be like, these are amazing, So this the photo on the left is actually kind of breaking my rule here. That's actually Jean and Harlow's new house that they had moved to. And one day I went to visit them, and Jean was burning Harlow's work clothes. And then, of course, one day at the subdivision after the Bears had lost the game, they were burning the quarterback's jersey in the front driveway. But then this past June, I was able to make a whole new set of diptychs. I went to the triplets high school graduation, and then Amanda put her house on the market. And then this past November, they sold the house and moved out. So then I was able to make pairings of, matching the Cadwins moving out of their farmhouse and Amanda moving out of her house. So that was a lot of fun to go back and kind of relive.
Oh, that's a
my
wonderful
glory days.
That's wonderful.
Thank you. So the project finished up after 27 years, and Amanda now is with a man named Josh, and they bought a new house, which actually on a big plot of land for the barn. So that was kind of funny that they went that direction.
Oh.
Yeah, so this was called Common Ground, and so that was that. It definitely is like the project of my career. It's like, people. One of my favorite things when I show them this, they're like, "Oh, what's next?" There's nothing next. There's no next. Like when I showed this work at the portfolio review, people were giving me all these ideas on how to extend the project. I'm like, no, I don't want to do it anymore. I'm done, Because the fascinating thing is the triplets themselves would have made an amazing documentary because they've all gone different directions. Abby is a college student at Oregon State. Aiden works at a Jiffy Lube in Lockport, Illinois. And then Katie has transitioned, and his name is now Zenith, and he's in the Navy.
Right.
So it definitely was fascinating how this everyday suburban family is just kind of has all these just kind of trends, and well, not trends, but just just kind of pieces of everyday life that are really fascinating and interesting. So,
Oh,
but yeah, but so I think this for me was, especially the subdivision, was just, me, I love hanging out with just people in their everyday lives, and, they don't have to, have cancer, they don't have to, just won some major award or something, where like newspapers, where there has to be a news hook to everything, where there is really no news hook here. It's just everyday life.
right, right.
Right. So any more questions? It's the longest presentation I've ever given. This is great. I love it. Yes.
You mentioned that sports photography has helped you in your personal projects, but I was wondering if photojournalism has shaped the way you work on your personal projects, or is it mainly just like you rebelling from photojournalism?
I think if it wasn't for photojournalism, I wouldn't have any personal projects. So I think it's all kind of interconnected. But it's, I think a lot of the kind of motivations that I put on my work is only in these situations now where I have to look back upon them, because I'm just a creating machine. I just create. And, sometimes I forget to, do something with the work I create. And so the pandemic was, I bought a scanner and scanned in a lot of my old work that I had laying around in a tub. So that was fun. And so that kind of leads me into, I guess I forgot, I need to talk about NFTs. And so, I've sold prints over the years, not super successfully. It's hard to sell prints. And so, it was always part of, my stream of revenue, but not really a big part of it. But then all of a sudden, when Beeple sold his NFT for $69 million, all of a sudden I was part of the crowd that's like, what's an NFT? And so I started, kind of paying attention. This was early 2021, and not many photographers were selling NFTs back then. So NFT, if you don't know, it's non-fungible token. So basically, any digital file could be an NFT. It can be a song, it could be a photograph, it could be 3D art, it could be animation, it could be a feature film, it could be an NFT. Anything that you kind of can put in on a computer, and basically the NFT is basically you're putting the code of an image onto a digital ledger, which is the blockchain. And the blockchain has many different cryptocurrencies that are exchanged on there. The main one's Ethereum. Like Bitcoin really isn't like used for NFTs, although I think it's something that people will eventually get into. But then there's a whole bunch of other ones. There's the Flow blockchain, which has Flow dollar, and some of them, like the Ethereum blockchains, are really bad for the environment. They take a lot of energy to mint a photo, which basically to mint a photo is just taking your digital file and turning it into an NFT. And there's also gas fees that go along with it, and those are very volatile. One day it'll cost $15 to mint an NFT. Some days it costs $300 to mint an NFT. It all depends upon demand. But basically what it is a photo NFT is like having a print that you only sell one print of. Like if you have your favorite image and you say, I'm selling one print and that's all I'm ever going to sell it for. And if I sell this to you and then you resell it, I get 10% of what you sell to someone for, which is the cool thing about NFTs, is you set a royalties on it. You can set 100% royalty on it, but then no one would ever resell it. But most people set it at 10%. So when I set an NFT now, and then if someone resells it, then I'm recouping a little bit more money off of it, which is good. And I've had one collection, my Shooting from the Hip collection, actually has been my most successful NFT one, where I had a collection of 51 images. And when I had written the article for the NPPA, I sold 2/3 of it, and then I hadn't sold any for months and months and months. But then all of a sudden, someone found it again, and then it got more popular, and then I ended up selling it out. And then one of the marketplaces, OpenSea, which is kind of the most popular marketplace, they posted it on the front of their website, and then I was able to make about 50 secondary sales. But then I also have other collections now too. Foundation is another NFT marketplace where you need to be invited by a collector. Invited by a creator who's already on there, excuse me. And so foundation is a little more upscale. You price your NFTs a little bit more, a little bit higher price. So I have some photos on the foundation marketplace too. And so it definitely is, the best thing about the NFT experience has been, Twitter is pretty much the hub of NFTs, where if you would have looked at my my Twitter feed a year and a half ago, it would have been this really kind of nice mixture of sports and news and just personalities and opinion and things like that. But once I started getting into NFTs, the algorithm now, like my Twitter feed is 99% NFTs, just every day, NFTs, NFTs, NFTs. But the cool thing about the NFT space is Twitter Spaces is where people will go, and it's kind of like Clubhouse, where people will come into a room and they'll talk about photography, and you're able to pin up a tweet, but you really can't share work. But it's just people talking about photography, which is amazing because it's something that I rarely do outside of a situation like this. But now every single day, there'll be different Twitter Spaces where people will be talking about street photography or talking about landscape photography, or like it seems like within the last 2 months, like all the creators of content on OnlyFans, like all of a sudden moved to NFT. So like I can't even open my Twitter feed in like public anymore because you never know when there's going to be a naked body just right there. Because Twitter isn't like Instagram. Twitter doesn't really seem to care what you post, or Instagram will censor you. But anyways, so like even though I've made a fairly good chunk of money on NFTs, it's more the community that's been interesting. And so like I've been exposed to all this work of photographers around the world. Like the Ukrainian photographers have been making a lot of money because they do beautiful work, but also because people are supporting them. It's a really great way to get money to the people in Ukraine. And it's an interesting marketplace because a lot of the people who have the money to buy, or the Ethereum to buy, they don't have any art background at all. And so it's interesting to see what they purchase. And so it started out as if you were someone who was a good marketer and you went in a Twitter space and told your story. It really didn't matter the quality of your photographs, that people would buy them just because they liked your story. And now it's getting a little more, I think the collector's aesthetics are getting a little more trained and sophisticated. And so there's a lot of documentary work that's been selling a lot, and a lot of street photography. Photojournalism in general hasn't really made a good dent yet, and sports photography hasn't basically done anything at all. So I think that's something that'll come in the future. But it's like the NFT space changes so rapidly. Like every month, a different trend or a different body of work will be successful. Like I started in August of 2021. My first 2 months, I sold probably $40,000 worth of NFTs, and then I went 6 months where I sold maybe $1,000 worth, and then all of a sudden it got discovered again, and then I sold probably $60,000 worth of NFTs, and now I've gone the last month where I haven't sold anything. So it's like this really kind of very cyclical thing, and I'm not sure what it's based on. And but it's it's definitely fascinating, and there's a lot of haters, of course, because people hate everything online. But but the fine art world, they're kind of not sure what to do with this because everything is transparent, which is great because you can see what everyone paid for everything, and like everything on the blockchain is free for anyone. Like I have a cryptocurrency wallet which has like all the images I've created and all the images that I've collected from other people. And anyone can go in my wallet and see what I have in there. My wallet address is public, and you can go, everyone's wallet address is public. Where like in the fine art world, you can't walk into a gallery. I can't walk into a gallery and say, I want to buy that. Well, excuse me, sir, who are you? Do you have any references? And, well, how much does that cost? Well, we're not going to tell you. And then if you do work your way through all the levels of red tape to be able to buy something, then they're like, you can't resell that though. No reselling this artwork because that devalues it or something. So like it's kind of this whole separate world than the fine art world. But of course, now that the fine art world sees that all this money is being made in NFT space, all of a sudden, let's check this out. And so, but it's slowly becoming what everything else is, where the top 1% are making all the money and the bottom 99% are making nothing. And so it's definitely a fascinating place. And yes.
How do you feel about that? Like,
You said like, you know, kind of like touching on like how the top percent are making a lot of the money, whereas like NFTs could be very helpful for like smaller artists who are struggling to make an income. And then there are some artists or even just like celebrities that profit off of NFTs that don't necessarily need to, but because of their following, they're able to.
Right,
Like, how's it?
Well, it seems like right now that a lot of the people making sales in the NFT space are the ones that are super active, which is good. You know, there are some star photographers who just kind of swoop in and they sell their work and then they leave. But I do feel that there's been a handful of artists that it's just totally changed their lives, which is amazing. There's one guy, Isaac Wright, who goes by Drift, and he was arrested a year or two ago. He's a Army veteran and has a little bit of PTSD, and so he finds relief in climbing buildings and photographing his van gym shoes from the top of buildings. And so he was arrested in Cincinnati for, I think, climbing the baseball stadium or something, and it became a cause celeb in like the New York Times did an article on him. And so then he put up a collection of his photos of his van shot from the top of all these buildings around the United States. And he's a multimillionaire now, and he's he's his own brand, and it's just amazing to see. And Justin Aversano, who did he was probably the first and most successful photographer in the space, where he did a series of 100 portraits of twins around the world. He was a twin, and his twin died, and so he decided to do a portrait series on twins around the world. And so his 100 NFTs now, the lowest price of the 100 are $1 million. So every single one has a floor of $1 million or above. Now, if he were to enter those photos in a photojournalism photo contest, he might get an honorable mention, maybe not.
Yeah.
So it's and it's great work, and I'm not trying to discount his talent, but it's a different scale of what I'm used to, because like I've judged many photo contests in the past, and like so I'm when you judge a photo contest, like the photos that go by, you'll be like out, 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 in, out, out. So like like we're judging like does this photo resonate with you immediately? Which is certain photos don't resonate immediately. Some of them you look at them for a while and like, oh, that one's really growing on me and stuff. So anyways, his work is really important because it's a historical thing in the NFT space, and also more importantly, people are able to resell the images and make profit. And so basically that's the basis of the NFT market, is speculation. It's people have called it pyramid scheme. I don't think it's a pyramid scheme so much as it's just gambling, really. Especially they have these things called PFPs, which basically are photos for profiles. So it's like the Bored Ape Yacht Club, which are just cartoon apes.
So the avatars.
Yeah, the avatars. They all have different rarities assigned to them. So there's 10,000 of them, and one is the most rare and one's the least rare, and those have been super successful. But now there's every day 20 new PFP projects introduced, and maybe one a month becomes something that's really valuable. And the rest of them, are just people speculate. I've speculated on some, and I bought, some here and there, but none of them have evolved. So yes.
You're kind of talking about it right now, but like the end use, either the collector or person that's buying it or someone that's speculating, basically they're moving it. Basically.
Yeah, so I would say this is just a guess. I would say 90% of people buying NFTs are hoping to resell them for profit. And then the other 10% are either supporting fellow artists or they just like collecting art. Or when I was a kid, I collected baseball cards. I loved it. And now I can't afford to buy too many NFTs, but I probably have bought maybe 10 or 15 photos that in my collection, and I love it. Like I would never think of buying a print from a photographer, but I would buy their NFT. You know, part of me in the back of my head's like, maybe I can resell this someday for profit, but you know, all the money that I've spent on buying NFTs has all come from the money I've gotten selling them. So, you know, I'm not dipping into my normal money to, you know, it's all kind of play money, because I would never buy an NFT for $4,000, but I would buy one for 1 Ethereum, which equals $4,000, if that makes any sense. So it's like, I think the thing about Ethereum is it's like when you buy something for something that's 1, it doesn't seem that bad, but if it's 4,000, it seems a lot more. Now I think it's 3,500. So it's kind of this psychological thing too, but it's but there's also other, like I'm involved sort of in something that's slow getting off the ground, is on the Flow blockchain, which is 1-to-1 US dollar to Flow dollars, and also it's much better for climate. I mean, the environment. There's no, you know, mining involved in it. So I'm going towards trying to, even though you have to kind of be on the Ethereum blockchain to have a presence, I'm trying to put more work on the blockchains that are better for the environment. But you know, I'm also flying in airplanes, and I'm also doing things that are also horrible for the environment. So, you know, I think people really kind of are focusing on how NFTs are so horrible for the environment, but then they're doing all these other things in their daily lives that are really horrible for the environment. But since they've been doing them for their entire lives, they seem okay. So
I think that part of it seems like a lot of talk to a certain degree, like just like you're mentioning, that they're kind of, it seems to be about identity and narrative. But like my main question actually is, from that 10% of people, the actual use of the NFT, aside from being a commodity, and how it's used, because even with drift, I mean, that could theoretically, you know, be purchased and used, and it just becomes advertised to a certain degree. Things can be taken in a lot of different ways, or seen as like a historical moment to a certain degree. So it's like, how is it different from like corporate art, stock art, you know, fine art purchases? I mean, what's going on in that sphere as far as
I think it's a lot
how
of that.
I hear about that.
Yeah, I think a lot of that will just kind of, we'll see, because like this is so new.
Right.
But like the buzzword in NFTs is utility. What's the utility of this NFT? Does it give me anything in real life? You know, so like some photographers, if you buy their NFT, they'll send you a print of it. Some photographers, you know, if you buy the NFT, I'll give you a free workshop. You know, if like I'm thinking of putting up like a collection of my street photography and pricing them at 1 Ethereum each. And if you buy one, I'll come to your town and I'll do a photo workshop with you in whatever city you live in, you know, because I can afford, you know, because you're going to be giving me $3,500 for one photo. I'll come to your house, you know. So, but there's things like that. I think that there's, it's almost kind of, you know, you can, you know, it can go any direction that they want. Like I would like to see there be NFT assignments. You know, like if a collector says, I would love to have a collection of 50 street photographs in San Francisco, I'll give you 10 Ethereum and you create a body of work for me and you send me the images and I'll own all the rights to them. I'll be like, absolutely. Yeah.
It's the financial thing. So there's a lot of different things like what you talked about that are going to develop and change. There's always going to be a certain amount of, you know, it becomes this kind of underground special thing. And of course, eventually, you know, it you know, enters into kind of different kind of lexicon kind of use case.
Yeah, but the I would say the almost the entire momentum of the NFTs is people wanting to make a quick buck. That's what the entire thing is. You know, if it wasn't for that, it would be, you know, because like no one buys a print of a photographer and then a day later resells it for 10 times what they paid for it. That doesn't happen. You know, so that's why the general public doesn't buy art. You know, I guess you could, you know, buy a Picasso, but still, there's so much more to go to resell it and make money than there is in an NFT. An NFT, you just sit there all day, you know, and just and you don't even have to do any work. You put it on the OpenSea marketplace. That's like the main secondary site, and you know. like someone could be buying one of my things right now. I don't have to do any work. You know, there's no materials either. I don't have to get a print made. I don't have to mail it to anyone, you know, so for me, it's just all gravy. There's, you know, except for the, you know, the environmental part of it, it's all, it seems to be a mostly win-win situation.
Yeah, I'm sorry. What forum did you say was the
So
best
like the one
to start selling on? If we wanted to-
So OpenSea is the one where you can kind of, it's almost like you can create your own like portfolio where you can put up a collection of images. Usually they're all kind of the same theme. And on OpenSea, you post your images, and then if someone wants to buy one, then they have to pay whatever price you set, but then they also have to pay to mint it, which would be whatever the gas fees are at that point when they want to buy it. Now, the thing with the other sites like Foundation, those, I have to pay to mint them in order to sell them. So the person who buys something off of Foundation, they don't have to pay the gas fees. There's a small gas fee just for the transaction.
So Foundation.
But
you have to be invited.
Yeah, Foundation, you have to be invited. And so, so that's why I think the prices are a little bit higher on Foundations, because the artist has to pay up front to mint them. And so like I've minted 20, 28, 31 photos on Foundation, which I've probably paid, I would say $2,500 out of my own pocket to mint those 31 images. And if I never sell those, then that's $2,500 that I've lost, you know. But I think I've sold, you know, I've recouped that all in sales already. But yeah, it's more, so it just depends. There's very little barrier of entry in OpenSea, you know, because anyone can put photos up there. And, you know, you don't have to really, I think you pay a small initialization fee, somewhere under $100 to create an account. And then, you know, if no one buys them, then no one buys them, but you're not out any money. But, and then the first step in all this, if anyone's interested, you have to open up a cryptocurrency wallet, like MetaMask, Coinbase has them, and you have to buy a small amount of Ethereum and stuff like that. So that's the process you have to go through. But if you Google my name and NPPA and NFTs, I wrote an article, kind of my journeys. This was like 2 or 3 months ago, just kind of, you know how I went through the whole thing. And, you know, it'll be totally obsolete and outdated within 6 months, but I still think there's something in there that's available.
Question I had is, you know, I did send the students that essay that you wrote for NPPA because I did think it was very simple and very approachable.
That's me.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So there is this idea, though, like when I first learned about NPPA, or when I first learned about NFTs, suddenly I started to think, oh, this is a new way for artists who may not have had traditional ways to make income from their art to begin making income from their art. Like I work commercially, so I know how to like be a photographer and maybe make work that speaks to that marketplace,
Right.
The commercial marketplace. But you know, I have friends and associates all over the world whose work is utterly fascinating, that it wouldn't speak to the commercial market and it doesn't really speak to the traditional art market. And NFTs seemed like, oh, look, they could begin this process. Now, reading your essay, though, you did have a little comment, and you said, well, I realized that in the NFT market, it's not really, your success isn't really based on the quality of your image or your art. It's based on, I think you said, like your involvement in the community,
Right.
Or something like that.
Right.
Can you elaborate on that?
So I think there's kind of like this, you know, you ever follow a band when they're first starting out, you see them in a small club and all of a sudden they get successful and you're like mad, like
Yeah,
the other
for sure.
people who jump on at the end, you're like,
Yeah.
hey, I was here in the beginning.
Yeah.
You know, and I think it's kind of like that where, you know, hey, I'm out here every day on Twitter and I'm retweeting people's images and I'm on Twitter Spaces and I'm talking about my work and other people's work and I'm doing all this effort. How dare you just stroll in and think you're going to sell your work without putting any effort into it, no matter
Right.
how good your work is. You know, so I think there's as time goes on, that kind of is going to go away because there's going to be so many people in it that it's not going to matter. And it's just going to be just like, going to target.com and buying something. But, but right now there's still this kind of old school from a year ago,
Oh, yeah.
Versus new school of people just coming in now. So I think I think like a portion of the NFT community, once someone, especially if they're have real life success when they come in, that they have to kind of kiss the ring a little bit and
Yeah.
say, you have to, you're nobody in the NFT space. You have to prove yourself. It doesn't matter if you're a National Geographic photographer,
Right.
you don't care.
Right.
You have to come in and you have to be one of us first. And, but if someone is going to make a lot of money off of a National Geographic photographer's NFTs, really when it comes down to it, no one cares.
Right.
So if they can resell something. And so there's some like quantum art is the #1 success story for like selling work. So they will drop a new photographer or a photographer's work each week. And they have this collector base that pays money to be able to buy the work. So they have to buy a minting pass to be able to buy the work. Like I can't buy a quantum art drop unless I go on the secondary market and pay extra. But like that is a lot of documentary photographers who have spent years working without much pay, but have this consistent body of work. And so like there's a woman, Julie Blackman, I think it is, she does these amazing kind of Gregory Crutzen type things with kids. And she's super successful. And those, the quantum art drops, usually there'll be 100 items priced around $2,500, $3,000 in US dollars, and they'll sell out in 8 minutes. And so these photographers are making $100,000, $200,000 in 10 minutes,
Right.
And so and then a chunk of the secondary market too. So, but the thing is, as a photojournalist, that's why, like, I'm one of the few photojournalists that have all these personal projects that I own on the side. Most of my colleagues, they don't really have any personal work. They just concentrate on their day job, and then they don't have anything to sell really because they don't own any work. And so that's why I think a lot of fine art photographers and landscape photographers and photographers that have just been creating the work because they love to do it, they're the ones that are really being rewarded because they have a body of work that has been successful, but they also own it, and they were able to just kind of show it to a whole new audience of people who've never seen it before. So and then the quantum art has created a system where pretty much all the work they put up is brilliant, but it really doesn't matter. It all kind of sells out. I assume at some point that's going to end, because there's how much money is there really out there? But who knows? It seems to be a lot.
Yeah. Let's switch kind of spots here, and I'll field the questions from the Zoom.
Did you have a question?
Actually,
Yeah.
we kind of touched on it a little bit, but so for the images that you shot or that you shoot for the Chronicle, the ones that are not used, do they still own those?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So every
Even though
shoot,
they're not
every shoot I photograph goes on like onto a hard drive and it's backed up, and but it's like the odds of any of those images ever being looked at are so slim, because they're really, whenever the newspaper needs a file photo, they'll just go into the system of photos that I've already sent in. I don't think they've ever once said, hey, can you go back into your tape and find another image from this assignment? They'd rather use an Associated Press or a Getty image before they ask me to go back and look for a staff photo for something, which at times I'm like, that's stupid. Why don't you just call me and I can within 10 minutes find this photo? Why are you running an Associated Press photo of Steph Curry in the Chronicle? It's like we have a million Steph Curry photos. It's just that it's easier for them to just go, here's the photo instead of making a call and having to go through the whole process. But yeah, there's, like I said, I'll shoot a Warriors game with 5,000 photos. I'll send in maybe 50 of them, and the other 49,950 of them will go on a hard drive and never be seen again.
See, and that's the thing. When I did my internship at the Chronicle, I've got all these images that we never used, And I asked, oh, okay, so I know that the ones that were published, clearly those belong to the Chronicle, but the ones that weren't, there are a lot of good ones in there, but I can't sell them or I can't make any kind of.
Assume no one will ever know. The images that were published, no one will ever know. I would, like, I don't think, like, someone's gonna say, that looks sort of familiar from, like, I think, I think you're safe to do whatever you want with those, especially since, I forget, as an intern, you signed a contract. Do you sign a contract or anything? Like, I don't.
I did.
Did you?
And I don't remember seeing anything in there about unused images.
Yeah.
So
See, like, I have a bunch of negatives that I took with me from the newspaper I worked at from 1988 to 1997. And the newspaper has been sold like 8 times. They don't have a newsroom anymore. At one point, they threw all the images in their archive in the garbage. So like, I have this chunk of images. Like, I haven't sold any of them as NFTs yet, but if I do, who's going to tell me that they own those images? There's like no, there's no couple of my photo editors that passed, so it's just, I think, like, I think it's just kind of, it seems stupid to like have those images that you created, like, not be able to be shown or like, be part of your body of work or your stream of revenue or something, because what's the value of them to the Chronicle? They're not, I don't even think they even have access to them, do they? So but if my bosses are on there, that was all wrong what I just said. But yeah, I think you're safe to kind of, use those images as you want, but that's not San Francisco Chronicle approved advice. That's just me personally.
Here's a question that came here from Max Yu. As crypto and NFTs become more mainstream, would you say fine art that is sold on OpenSea will be devalued compared to a physical art gallery? Will it eventually replace traditional galleries? And Max, speak up if I misread this or if you want clarification on anything.
No, Tim, that was great. That's exactly what I'm asking.
Oh, okay. That was a good question.
Yeah, I think if NFTs continue to be successful, we're going to at some point merge. I know Christie's has sold NFTs at auction, and so I think that you'll just someday you'll go in a museum and there'll be a video monitor there, and the video monitor will show the NFT, or there'll be just a slideshow of NFTs, and of course that's happened already. And I assume there'll be a museum of NFTs in New York City at some point, and but when it comes down to it, I don't know. I think art is art is art is art. It doesn't matter what it is. I think because NFTs are so new that they're this whole separate category. But when it comes down to is, does it communicate? It's just kind of like when people, like this film digital debate, like, oh, I only shoot film and digital is, why would you shoot digital? But, if you put a photo up on the wall or up on the screen here, like, does that photo move you? Is it something that you're interested in? And if it does, do you care if you shot with film or shot digitally? It's kind of the old argument of, when I go to a restaurant and, order a meal and it's fantastic, I never say, what kind of stove do you have? This must have been in a really good pan. Like, it's the same thing where it's like, either the meal's good or it's not good. It doesn't really matter how it was made. And that's how I feel about art in general. That people get so caught up in the process and so caught up in, how it was made that, it's like, does the piece itself communicate and is it valuable? That's what's important to me. So I think at some point it's all going to merge together. But in the fine art world, photography is in itself is still devalued. It's still, paintings are still more important. And photography is the second-class citizen to paintings. And I assume NFTs will be third-class citizen to prints and artwork for a long time. But I still think they'll continue to be successful because it's just all about, I think, the art for at least me.
Yeah, I mean, it is true that in the history of photography, there has always been someone telling you no,
Right.
and like the Leica wasn't a real camera when it
Right.
came out, and then there was digital wasn't real photography, and the phone wasn't real photography. So NFT, even though it's not a way to make the image, it's a market. It seems like it's suffering the same.
Right.
Though I would say, me following the Twitter NFT, 80% of it feels like someone's selling me a get rich quick scheme.
Yeah.
And then the other part seems like, oh, this is another resource for photographers. And can you comment on that?
Well, another annoying thing too is like people in the NFT space just celebrate everyone. Oh my God, that's amazing! You're amazing. We're all amazing, amazing. We're all gonna make it.
Yeah.
Oh, it's like everything is not fantastic.
Yeah.
You know, it's just like everything is not amazing. You know, and there has to be at some point some hierarchy of what is good and what's great and what's not great, what's mediocre, and everything is not amazing, and we're all not going to make it.
Right.
But I think it's like I'm not going to tell someone not to be happy or not to like celebrate stuff. So and it is it's so subjective. Some people they're not interested in my NFTs, and they're interested in an NFT of someone who shot a photo of their foot. But
Right.
It speaks to them, so that's fine. But yeah, it's that is my internal struggle at times. Well, I'll see a photographer who sells a lot of work of stuff that I feel my work is better, but mine's not selling. And it's like,
Right.
well, how come?
Well, that's human nature. I mean,
Right,
that's
relevant.
yeah. Oh, let's see. Fiona, did you have a question?
Kind of. Well, just really quick question. Are NFTs like specific to certain digital devices? So like, for example, I was thinking like, because sometimes for me when I think about like owning an NFT, I'm like, okay, like do I just go on my computer? But I've been thinking if I were to get an NFT, could I put it in one of the digital picture frames or picture frame TV?
Yeah, no, definitely. Like that is. I'm not sure. So when it comes down to it, an NFT really isn't the image.
Yeah,
It's not.
it's
It's really
the-
it's code. It's when you're buying a bunch of code.
Yeah.
And really, like the image is only it just you're buying something that stands for an image
Yeah.
basically. But it's definitely something where you can put it on your TV screen or something, or or have a video player or whatever, like you said, a little photo frame player or whatever. So yeah, so technically you are buying the photo, but you're not really buying the photo. But I think when it comes down to it, that's all semantics. You really are just you're purchasing an image and you can show it to people, and there's also this whole world of, well, I can right click this and copy it and I own a copy of it, Well, but also you can also take a photo of the Mona Lisa and say you own the Mona Lisa, but you don't, So it's like, the thing about the blockchain is that there's only one verified version of that image or that NFT. And if you purchased it, that's what you own. You own that, the only verified image, But yeah, but there's so much scamming out there. Like, what would keep you from, selling anyone's photographs on the NFT space? Unless if someone caught you, of course, you might get in trouble. But there's a lot of that out there too. Where if you went on OpenSea, there's 4 other shooting from the hip collections where people have just copied my photos and put their name on them and they're selling them.
You're kidding me.
Your exact photos,
Yeah,
Really?
They haven't sold any.
but that's like a thing, but they could be even, could
Yeah.
someone claim
Can
that
you
they're
report
reselling?
them like you can on
Yeah.
Instagram?
So I don't know if I can see if I can. But yeah, it's I might have to do it. But anyways, yeah. So basically, yeah. There's I mean, reported them. It's like if they sold some, maybe I would. But yeah, but they're basically like one has like 12 of my photos in there, and it's a shooting from the hip by Frederick Smith. And then another one that has like 15 of them by some other person's name. I just noticed it like 2 weeks ago. Like, compliment. Oh, that's nice. But yeah, there's so much of that out there, and then there's so many. It doesn't. It's just like any other thing that you to be scared of. Like it's such a small percentage of unless you're really stupid, and because the key thing to your cryptocurrency wallet is you get a seed phrase, which is 10 words. So it's like apple, dog, car, whale. So it's 10 words with spaces in between. And that's the only way to get access to your wallet. So like if you somehow are having a problem with OpenSea, some scammer will be like, oh yeah, I'll help you, just send me your seed phrase. And then people will do that, and then people will just like take everything out of their wallet. And then, you know, there's a trail on the blockchain, but it goes to like some wallet address and stuff. And so of course there's way to get that all out. But there's everything are people trying to scam you. So, but if you're just smart about it, it shouldn't happen.
Like what the pros and cons of NFTs have been for you personally?
The cons are it takes up so much of my time, and my girlfriend is like, will you fucking get off Twitter? The pros have been I've been experienced to a lot of photographers' works that I've never knew existed. I've reconnected with a lot of friends of mine who I haven't talked to in 15 and 20 years who are like, hey, what's this NFT thing about? Can you teach me about it? And so that's been kind of cool. The Twitter spaces are fun. I've made a good chunk of money, which has been great. My work's been seen by a lot of new people. So I think it's mostly positive, but it is a time suck. It's like I spent a lot of time on it. And so I've been off Twitter for 2 hours, 2.5 hours now. What have I missed? And so, but it's definitely, it's been mostly good. But, there's some days where I'm just like, I don't know how, as long as I keep making money, I'll probably be interested in it. But there's also this thing too, it's like, I've been a photographer for 35 years. I have so much work to sell. And like, I think I've put up too much work already, and it's just a fraction of what I have. I have all these Michael Jordan and Chicago sports photos from the 90s that, I'm not sure copyright wise, like is the NBA going to sue me? Is Michael Jordan going to sue me? But so far there's been no one has been successfully stop someone from like selling intellectual property of someone that someone else thinks they have. So at some point I'll probably do a classic Chicago sports collection, and then I have so much more street photography from Chicago. I have, I just have all this work that there's so much work you can put out there. Like the collectors want scarcity to your work. They don't want too much of it out there, unless of course they're making money off of it. Then they want a lot of it out there. So but I only have the one collection that's sold out. That's really the only collection of mine that's been successful. The rest I've just sold like a couple here and there. So then I don't know. Do I bring out another? Do I shooting from the hip 2? Will that devalue shooting from the hip 1? Do I care if it devalues the first one? Because I'm only making money off of 10% of the sales on that one. So at some point I'll probably put more of those up there, maybe do a San Francisco collection, but mostly it's been very positive. And once again, it's not like prints or selling a book. There's no like real labor involved in going to the post office or getting things printed, but there is just that time that you spend interacting with people. I think that's a positive.
Good question. Any other questions here? You guys good? Let's thank Scott for his time. Thank you so much, Scott.
Very much. I had a blast. You guys were a really good audience, very engaged, and good questions. Thank you.